Okay, I would like to call the August 29th meeting of the school committee to order. As we return to school this week, we also return to real agendas, so we'll probably be here a little bit later than we have been our last couple of meetings. In terms of the agenda tonight, we're going to do some sort of agenda gymnastics from an order perspective. We'll start with the personnel section. Dr. Milczewski will do some new staff introductions and welcomes. We'll return to our routine matters section, public comment for any items that are not on the agenda. We'll go through our consent agenda. We'll go through our reports. We'll then take item E1 from new business, which is our beginning of school update. And then as we move to old business, Mr. Robinson and I think maybe some other members of the track naming advisory committee will share their recommendation on the work that they've been doing the last couple of months. And we will take any further discussion as well as a vote on their recommendation. We'll then return to the new business section. When we get there, I'm gonna ask Carla for a motion. We'll take E4 and E5, the two Killam items, out of order. We expect GNAP and Associates, or GNAP Architects rather, to join us this evening for that session. So just to get them through as quickly as we can. And then we'll return to E2 and E3, the handbook updates. We don't anticipate taking a vote on the handbook updates tonight. We will have Principal Tracy and Principal Rubino here to talk about the updates that they're making to their respective school handbooks. And then Dr. Milczewski will also share an update on some broader thinking and context around how we're approaching handbooks. And then we'll return in one of our next couple of meetings to take the vote on those two in particular. And then we'll close out. Ms. Baton will give us an overview of our new district website, which is very nearly ready for prime time. So that is our agenda for this evening. So before we jump in, Carla, can I ask for a motion on C1?
I move to take C1, new staff, out of order.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Tom. All in favor? All opposed? Dr. Milczewski, it's all yours.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to see you. I think this is a very exciting time to be able to welcome a lot of our new staff, a lot of our new leaders officially to our community. So I'm going to ask all those who are new Reading Public School employees to please come on up to the microphone just to share your name and share your role. If you have anything else you'd like to share, you're more than welcome. But it's important for the community to be able to see you and be able to connect a face to some of the names. So move on up and we'll get started.
I like the looks on the faces when you said that. I did not know they were going to do that.
That one was a curveball. My name is Catherine Friendzetti. I am the new food service director here at Reading Public Schools. I'm very excited to start off the new year. I come here from Boston Public Schools, culinary manager, and I hope to bring a lot of what I brought to Boston here to Reading. So thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to grow with you guys.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Rochelle Rubino. I'm the new principal of the Parker Middle School. I'm so excited to be here in Reading. I come from Arlington. I was an assistant principal at the Audison Middle School, and I cannot wait to see all of the students on Wednesday. It is going to be so fun and such a great year, so thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jessica Callanan. I am the new Director of Academic Achievement for the high school and Reading Public Schools. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Nicole Schwartz. I'm the new principal of Wood End. I am coming from Arlington Public Schools. I was an assistant principal at the Racket School, and I'm really excited to be joining the Reading team.
I don't think I have to adjust the mic much, which is nice. Thank you, Nicole. My name is Alyssa Gallegos. I'm the principal at Barrows Elementary School. I came from working as an assistant principal up in Newburyport Public Schools, but I am a Reading resident. Grew up here, and I'm excited to be back in my hometown serving our students and families. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Theodore Brown. I'm the new MECO Coordinator School Adjustment Counselor at the Joshua Eaton Elementary School. I'm looking forward to a great school year, and let's go Rockets.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cindy Marte. I am the MECO Coordinator / School Adjustment Counselor at Birch Meadow. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jillian Ashburner. I am the incoming or the new RISE Preschool Director. I've worked as a speech language pathologist and evaluator in early childhood programs in the Massachusetts public schools for about 15 years. In the last in Stoneham for the last 10. And I am also a Reading resident and a Reading Public Schools parent, and I am absolutely thrilled at the opportunity to serve my community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Gregory Kanzader. I'm the new middle school METCO coordinator. I worked in BPS for several years. I also coach as well, basketball specifically. I'm actually coming from the gym right now. Head coach for Bunker Hill Community College women's basketball. So if you ever see me outside of school in some athletic attire, that's why. But very excited, had a great start today, and just can't wait to really get started to see the kids come, and pleasure to work with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We have two
I
more
see
coming.
Curtis giving a hand, come on in, so.
Two more. Walk in the door, walk up to the
Throw them into the deep end. Tom, do you want to repeat your prompt for?
So we just jump right in.
Welcome. Jump into the deep
Not
end.
wasting any time tonight.
Hi, I'm Joanne, and I'm going to be at Barrows Elementary.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Nadie, and I'm at Woodend.
Awesome.
All right, so just like to share too, I think we're in a context that we all know where it's really difficult to find really good leaders and really good educators. It's a really competitive market and job shortage, and I think we are thrilled with the quality of staff members that we add to our team. So we're really excited to start up, see how they do in front of our students, and again, feel really lucky with the quality of people here. And I think we'd like to invite everyone up to come take a photo with the school committee. And I see Al just came in. I'm sure Al would like a photo as well. So come on up for a quick photo, and thanks again for coming tonight.
I'm sorry, it wasn't because of that. What are you doing, Chuck? It's been a long day. I sighed. It wasn't because of the picture. Go ahead.
Kevin's not the pick.
Chris is like, I'm getting in with it. There we go. One more. Thank you.
So just like to share too, I know that the community's been involved in the budget process over the past year, and a lot of the conversations have been around some of our new roles. You see some of the additions that we were able to add as a result of new positions that we were added in. So I know the community was thrilled to be able to meet some of the folks, and I'm sure those are folks that we'll see around the school starting on Wednesday. All right, so that's all for new staff. Also, staff, feel free to step out. I know many of you are presenting tonight too, but we know we have a big day tomorrow and Wednesday, so feel free to step away at any point.
Great. Well, thank you, Tom, and or Dr. Milichewski, rather, and welcome to all of those who are here tonight and those who couldn't be here as well. So now we'll return to routine matters. So we'll start with public comment. If there's anybody, yep, absolutely. You know the drill, name, address, and for items not on the agenda.
Nancy Dr. Pearl Street. I'm also a Precinct 1 meeting member, and I'm actually thrilled that Killam is finally going to get the attention it deserves. When my kids went to Killam, it needed attention. They're now 28 and 30. And with all the excitement about Killam, I hope you don't forget actually to pay attention to, I think, a rather pressing issue, which is our teacher salary. I think you're going into the last year of collective bargaining. Is that correct?
We're in year
Going
two.
into- So good, now you have a year ahead, because to follow up with the superintendent's comments, about keeping competitive, unless we increase our teacher's salary conservatively by, I would say, $10,000 to $15,000 per teacher, we're not competitive. So I hope going into the next year, you actually really start thinking about how are we going to retain all of our new teachers, because you all know teachers are dropping like flies. So I think Reading has to get ahead of this and get ahead of it very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Doctor. Anybody else who would like to make a comment for anything not on the agenda tonight? Mr. Haley.
Thanks, Sean. I'm not sure how I'd follow up the 15 new hires, but I'm extremely excited with all of them coming aboard. So I'm here to speak about the Fall Street Fair that's coming up on September 11th from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. So our local leaders are volunteering their time in the dunk tank to support two great causes this year, the Reading Rotary itself, as well as the owners of Rough and Ready Dog Grooming, one of a small business here in town. One of the owners just suffered a serious setback over there. So half the money raised for that is going to be to the Reading Rotary, and then the other half is to Rough and Ready itself. So the way that it's going to work, just like last year, it's one ball for $2, 3 balls for $5, or auto dunk for $20. The lineup that we have this time around is pretty incredible. We have Fidel Maltez, our new town manager, Dr. Thomas Milichevsky, our new superintendent, or second year technically, Kevin Tracy from Reading Memorial High School, the principal, Katie Buckley, same thing, Reading Memorial High School assistant principal, Rochelle Rubin from Parker, the new middle school principal over there, Jay Pledge from Parker Middle School, the assistant principal, and then on the select board, it's Carlo Bacci, Chair Mark Doxer, Chris Haley, myself, Jackie McCarthy, and then from the school committee, Tom Wise. And then collecting balls, instead of being dunked, is Carla Nazar on the school committee. Trust me, we need signups for that still, so it's important. Jess Callahan, the new RMHS Director of Academic Achievement, and Jess Thoreau, the RMHS Assistant Principal. So to find out more about that, you can go to dunkthereadings.com. There's still a couple spots open for other things for the street fair, as well as the dunk tank. To once again collect balls. It is a arduous task. There's lots of running involved, so if you're either getting wet or doing that, one of the three, you'll be fine. And then last year we raised $1,326 that was rounded up to $2,000 by an anonymous donor. So hopefully this year we can surpass that with this lineup here. I don't think you can go to North Reading and dunk their superintendent in the upcoming weekend. So it will all go to a great cause, and I thank you all for volunteering your time, and I really hope to see everybody there. September 11th, 12 to 5. Dunkthereadings.com. Check it out. The Sign Up Genius link is at the bottom of the page there on the latest post if anyone wants to sign up for this, as well as anything else with the street fair that's remaining. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Chris. And for those that don't know, Mr. Haley foots the bill for renting the tank and the space at the street fair as well, so to raise money for a good cause. Oh, not this time around. Well, he built the momentum, and I'm sure you'll show up there, and I'm sure you'll show up in the same fabulous suit as last year, I hope. All right, wonderful. So everyone, that's worth the price of admission in and of itself. I won't mention that the street fair is free. Okay, so. Any other public comment before we move on items not on our agenda? I think I see others and know kind of why you're here. Okay, so we will then move to the consent agenda. Is there a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Is there any discussion? Oh, first, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Tom. Is there any discussion?
I have a few quick points
Go ahead, Tom.
or requests, I guess. The first one is on page 7 of the packet, under bullet 5, where it's talking about the accreditation agencies. It says, the last sentence says it plays into the rating of the school system. It should say it plays into the rating of our bond rating, is what it plays into. The next one is further down that page. The last sentence of the page has 2 commas. It should just be 1 comma. And then a request, and this is minor, but it is important for the actual minutes, is it doesn't have an adjournment time at the end, and we just probably should put that adjournment time. I think it was like 9:25 or 9:30 or something, find out what it is. And then the request is that we add the YouTube link like we used to as well.
Sounds good. Yeah, the adjournment time's my miss. Sue flagged that, and I forgot to look it up and share that. Okay, any other comments on the consent agenda before we take the vote? Okay, so we'll vote on the consent agenda as amended with Tom's edits. All in favor? And all opposed? Carries 5-0. Okay, and let's start with, let's go to reports. Dr. Stice.
Thank you very much. I have two reports tonight. One is that Lynn Lyons starts her training, or is continuing her training with all of our mental health support staff tomorrow. She's spending 2 half-days over the next couple of weeks with everyone, talking about anxiety, and then we're going to have a follow-up day with our psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, team chairs, all of our new adjustment counselors. We've invited our principals as well to really talk about specifically within the Reading context. What does this look like? How do we support students with attendance issues? How do we support families when they call in saying their student's anxious? So we're very excited to begin that work. And then the other thing we'd like to announce is we have completed clearing out our old special education records. They went back very, very far, some in the 80s that we were still storing in file cabinets. And with the help of Ms. Botan and her team, we were able to hire a scanning company so that all of the records are now being digitized. And if anyone does a records request, we can just email it to them. And we now have eliminated rows and rows and rows of file cabinets that were just storing old files. So it's been very exciting, and I'm very, very grateful to Franchina Green, our clerk, who spearheaded the whole project. I had nightmares after the truck left, filled to the tip with boxes that we had forgotten some. But Denise Santoro, Susan herself, Allison Wright, Michelle Roach and her team of Andrew and Kristen and myself, we were all down there unpacking files, checking to make sure students had left the district and getting them ready to be scanned. And going forward, we were able to come up with a process that as students graduate or age out, we will scan all their records. So we retain a copy and they will be able to take their copy with them. So we'll be more efficient with that. So we're very excited to have that project done.
Questions? Okay, Ms. Baton.
Yes, I have 3 very brief updates for you this evening and a little bit of a teaser. Our cafeteria workers, our managers, began today with training. They received a 5-hour training on a new upgraded POS system, point of sale system. And tomorrow, the rest of our cafeteria workers will be joining them to learn about this new system, which will increase efficiencies for the school's food service program, as well as health and safety training being presented by Mary Juliana, our Director of School Nutrition, Director of School Health Services, sorry. The second brief update is in regard to the Killam building project. We submitted the 2 deliverables that were due on August 30th, the educational profile questionnaire, which you all saw at your last meeting, and the online enrollment projections report, as well as a number of supporting documents that shared with the MSBA the community outreach that has been conducted since 2019 through, scheduled through the end of this year. The third is a quick update on school choice. On August 22nd, we had our second school choice lottery for this current school year, and 5 applications were received and accepted, 3 at the elementary and 2 at the high school, which makes a total of 11 school choice students who will be joining our community for this school year. And for those, we actually have received a couple email messages from families who missed the deadline from outside of Reading. So for those who might be listening or have friends from outside the community, we will be opening up another school choice lottery in the spring. And then lastly, the teaser is that for those who may not be able to tune in toward the end of our meeting this evening, we are going to be shifting over to a new Reading Public Schools website soon. It's not quite ready for prime time, but we will be communicating with the community exactly when that transition will take place. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you some of the components of our new site towards the end of this meeting. Thank you.
Susan, can you have the final version of what we submitted to MSBA sent through to us so we can
Absolutely.
just have that for our records?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Milichewski.
Great. So I have 3 updates tonight. First, want to start by acknowledging that today our staff started back up in our buildings. All of our teachers back. It was great to see them all looking rested, recharged, and ready for the year ahead. As we gear up, I'd just like to give a shout out to a couple of groups of staff members. I shared the same today with staff who have just been instrumental in getting us prepared for our students on Wednesday. First, facilities team, anyone who works for a facilities, maintenance, custodial team. I think it goes without saying, for those of you who've been in the community, our buildings are always in tip-top shape. And I think it's always humbling when people from the outside come in and walk into our building and just say, wow, look at how well-maintained our buildings are. And I know that our maintenance team takes great pride in the work that they do. So a huge shout out to them for preparing everything and getting us ready to go. Also to our clerical, secretary, admin assistant team who have been behind the scenes working on all different things thrown their way to make sure we're ready for students when they enter into our doors. And then lastly, a group I did not shout out today, but I will make sure I do in writing, as well as our IT team, who's been doing a ton of work behind the scenes to get us up and running and make sure that things are smooth for students as they start too. So just thank you to all of those staff members who, again, sometimes quietly behind the scenes over the summer when no one's watching, and then school magically opens, and it's a result of all of their hard work. So thank you. Second, I'd like to give an update on the track. So at our last school committee meeting, I shared the unfortunate news that we were delayed several weeks given some unforeseen circumstances in both labor and in materials. We are excited to share that we're back on track with no pun intended, with the timeline. I swear there was no pun intended. Back on track with the timeline that Cape and Islands, our subcontractor installing the track, came yesterday, got all the trucks set up and started the work today. So that puts us, again in that, 2.5 to 4 week window sometime in there, depending on weather, for us to be able to open up. So I think that we're still very much on pace right now to be able to open up for that September 23rd date that we all have circled on our calendar. So again, I'll keep the community informed, but excited that we actually now have the subcontractor on site beginning the work. And then lastly, you had the chance to meet Catherine, so I want to share a little bit so we had a little bit of a shift from the last time I shared an update around our food service director. The candidate who had accepted our offer before is no longer able to move forward in that role. It's not often in a search where you feel like you have 2 candidates who, I see Kevin nodding, was part of the search process, that they're just torn on what the best direction forward is. So it did not work out in the way we had planned with the other candidate. We are thrilled to contact back to Katie, and Katie, we're thrilled, decided to move forward and accept our offer. So I want to share a little bit about Katie. I know she did tonight. Formerly known as Catherine, but I think goes by Katie in some circles as well. So Katie Friendzetti, she was most recently in her last week as the culinary manager in the Boston Public Schools. In that role, she's responsible for the program oversight of over 40 different kitchens across BPS. Our screening committee, a couple things that stuck out about Katie was, one, her ability to articulate a future vision for what the food service department could look like 1, 3, 5 years down the line, her deep passion for culinary innovation, and her strong relationships with many community partners, vendors, and farmers. The team also noted her experience with individualized farm-to-table, locally sourced products, and providing those options to our students. Some specific accomplishments in her background include increasing breakfast participation in BPS by securing grants for grab-and-go smoothies as part of breakfast programming. I have said that I knew that would be a hit here, so Katie is very excited. Sometimes, no pressure, that's an exciting one that I know that was really a big hit in Boston. But again, that type of innovative, outside-the-box thinking is a way to make sure our students are well-nourished to start their day. Converting 36 school kitchens into production kitchens to serve over 5 million meals as students transition to remote learning. piloting a student-focused food sampling program in 42 different schools to utilize student feedback and ideas to drive menu development. We know we have a lot of students here who have ideas on what the menus could and should look like. A lot of them who I've met with, and I'm really excited for them to have the chance to interact with Katie and hear their ideas and see that reflected in our menus. And then lastly, launching 8 scratch kitchens, open sites to provide diverse, fresh-cooked, healthy meal options for our students. So again, I think able to bring in a candidate of Katie's caliber and her experience, we're really excited for the future of the program. Coupling not only bringing Katie's leadership, but moving the program or the role from half-time to full-time, we think that we can expect to see some pretty exciting movement in the department. So a huge welcome to Katie, and Katie, thank you for joining us tonight, and we look forward to having you as part of our team.
Smoothies. Can we have smoothies at the next school committee meeting?
Don't look at me.
All right, any questions on that? Okay, we'll go to liaison reports. Tom, I'll start with you.
All right, so the first thing, this short thing is Finance Committee. Ed can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a financial forum scheduled for 9/21, which is the third Wednesday, I think, of September. So we all should probably plan to be there as much as possible because many of our items will be on that agenda from a discussion perspective. The second thing is Policy Subcommittee met this morning at a request of Dr. Stice and as a result of some of the attendance work that's been done around the district. So we went through what I'll call the procedure that's now in the RMHS handbook and provided some feedback into that Dr. Stice has already sent back to Katie to incorporate as a result of it. Some of the major feedback that we provided was around the way in which absences are acknowledged for students, in particular around illness and college visits and other things, that there's some language in it that says it needs notes from certain things that you never get notes for. So that becomes an automatic unexcused absence if we didn't have those notes. So that's some of the feedback that went back. In addition, we looked at that in alignment with 2 policies that we have. One is JHBA, which is the skip days policy. And in particular, there's language in there that says if you're truant, you cannot make up work, and that's where some of this started. So we started discussing what skip days is. Should we even have this policy? It doesn't actually exist in the MASC policy manual. So we may be coming to this committee just to recommend repealing that policy altogether, just as a front running there. The other policy we looked at was policy JE, which is student attendance. We may look to include some of the existing documentation from the attendance group into that policy overall, and as well as normalizing and catching it up with the MASC policy as it stands. So that's the big update from there. In addition, MASC most recently published in August some updates with regards to the Acts of 2012, Chapter 117 updates that happened earlier this year, as a matter of fact, about head coverings and things along those lines and not being able to discriminate as a result of that. So we'll pick up a series of policies, about 7 or 8 policies that are in that realm, some of which you already started seeing in the Parker Handbook, as a matter of fact, I don't know if that was on purpose or not, but it's already there. But it's not consistent across the board. So front-running some of the other policy conversation ahead that will come into fray. And then we talked about the cataloging and related work from last year and picking that up, as well as picking up some of the requests from Ms. Baton and others that have asked us to look at different policies as well. So we're going to build a calendar and look at whether we meet monthly or every 3 weeks or every 2 weeks to make sure we can work our way through this once we've documented all the changes and whatnot, and come back to you, Sean, with requests for schedules and stuff like that.
Great. Chuck?
Excuse me, no report other than the coalition is meeting on Wednesday. I cannot attend, but I know Dr. Milicheski will be there, and we get back going with recreation next week, so.
Aaron?
No report tonight.
Carla?
The Killam School Building Committee met on 8/22, and I'm going to watch. It doesn't look like we have a quorum here tonight. If we do, we'll call the meeting. The presentation that we're going to receive tonight, we heard at our meeting on the 22nd from Dale Gnap. We are having a formal meeting. We're having a formal hearing on Killam at our meeting here on September 8th. So we're inviting the public and we're inviting any town meeting members who would like to come and hear about Killam and why it's necessary and where we're at in the process, and what it means to our community. And that's it.
Great, thank you. The Select Board hasn't met since we last met. Their next meeting is tomorrow, so we'll have a report on that next time. And then the ARPA Committee also meets on Wednesday, so we'll have a report on that as well. I just wanted to add one comment to Tom's summary of the September 21st Financial Forum, because I promised Fidel I would do so. The topic for that one, Sean Cronin from the Department of Local Services is coming to do sort of Muni Finance 101, and particularly how do you fund school buildings, I think. So that one will certainly be relevant for members of this committee. We will be posted both on the 21st, and I think the next Financial Forum is October 26th. We'll be posted for both of those as well. So. Okay, so with that, we can move on to, with a motion, Carla, if you've got one for E1, we can move on to new business. I'm just going to take E1 out of order.
So we are going to take, we're going to do an introduction to Killam right now, right?
Nope, we're going to take E1, which is the beginning of school update.
Oh, sorry, I'm already. I move to take the school update out of order, E1.
Is there a second?
Second.
Tom, all in favor? All opposed? All right, 5-0. So Dr. Milichewski, I will hand to you, Andy, I think you're hiding behind that post. We need to get, what do we need to do to get this presentation up here? Thank you. This is our best staff member right here. Yeah. We're just gonna share this screen, and then we'll need to get on the Zoom in a bit, but for now, just share the screen. We are piloting our Zoom technology tonight so that we can offer it for public consumption in future meetings. So bear with us as we stumble through a little bit here. It's the back to school update. It's the PDF, I think. Yeah. Tom, I don't know if you want to drive. That's great. Yeah. Thank you. We can just unplug the power. It should be okay. Thanks, Chris.
I think we're on a good stretch of 3 meetings in a row with children here.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Anybody want to sign up for the next one? No?
Okay, so I'm going to walk the community through just a brief back-to-school update on a couple of items here. I'm going to move pretty quickly to here, just I think these are high-level overviews. First, we're going to provide, and sorry that came out a little bit funky on PDF here, but provide a wrap-up to some of our summer programming, speak a little bit about what are some things that are new in 2022, 2023, walk through, again, high level of some of our RPS COVID protocols, and then close with just an ask for the community in some of the areas where we continue to see some staffing needs to reach out for your support. So just a summer wrap-up, I know Dr. Hardy and Dr. Sy spoke a couple of times about summer programming. Dr. Hardy tonight wanted me to share a few things about the summer program. As you know, Summer Vacation Academy provided programming both in ELA and in math for around 65 students. I'd like to share that 70% of those students are considered or categorized as high needs, which we know is either EL, students with disabilities, or economically disadvantaged students. Instruction focused on key grade level concepts and skills. Anywhere between 1st and 6th grade students. It was for 4 days a week for a 5-week session. Provided EL supports and services provided, and also transportation for several Boston resident students who were able to attend as well. So again, just thank you for all of our staff who took their summer to support our students. We feel that it was a success and that our students not only had a great time, but also made some significant academic gains. Today, this morning at our back to school opening with all of our teachers, we shared some of the things that are new in 2022, 2023. I want to speak of these rather quickly too tonight. Just the community gets to see some of the things that are in motion as a result of what we talked about throughout the budget cycle last year. So first, our biggest, most significant financial contribution came in our school counselors. We have made a significant investment in school counselor roles. We know that this was shared, sort of the funding was shared through the METCO grant and also through our operating budget. We feel that there's never been sort of a more significant time for in terms of social and emotional needs in our schools, and therefore we feel that adding 8 counselors across our district reflects that need. We've added a middle school METCO coordinator, Greg, who you had the chance to meet tonight, who's going to help us with our growing METCO program. We have a large, we think, increase of students at the middle school level, and adding Greg to be able to split his time full-time at Parker and at Coolidge, we think is really exciting for our students. And Curtis wants me to make sure I'm clear that in this role, that this is a role that's going to support all students, that this is not a role that is going to be only supporting our Boston resident students. This is a role who's going to be supporting all of our students in the building as they acclimate to all of the things that they're facing at the middle school level. We've added a special education department head, so now we have the same type leadership structure in all of our departments here at the high school. The director of academic achievement, who you'll be hearing about throughout the year, focused on designing systems of intervention and also now designing a lot of systems and programs of innovation. Added a special education evaluator. That was not in our budget, but we've done kind of through some creative funding to provide a 0.7 special education evaluator who's going to be focused on testing and evaluation to reduce the amount of time that our elementary special educators have to spend on testing and therefore free them up for more direct time with students. And then 3 roles that we've moved to full-time. The Director of Health Services, which I know we spent a lot of time talking about that need last year. Full-time Food Service Director, who I just spoke a little bit about the need for that and what we think the impact could be. And a full-time Data Specialist, who we think could really help us to make sure that we have our students with timely access to the programs and resources they need electronically, and also help us to design better systems for utilizing data at the district, school, class level as well. We think all of these investments in staffing are going to pay huge dividends on the experience for all of our students. Also, a lot of new around teaching and learning. A couple of things on here. We could make a laundry list, we think, of all the different things happening, but we've just decided to tonight stay high level and focus on a few of them. One, we know high curriculum materials really matter, and I think that's reflected in the investments you've seen recently in the district from illustrative math, moving from K to 8, and also art core in K to 5. We feel that is both having high quality curriculum materials in math and ELA are going to be game changers for our students. And again, a special shout out to I did this morning to our literacy leadership team, but also to our school committee, who I think really drove that process for us to find the funding. And thank you to our select board. Thank you to the ARPA committee, RAC now, I believe is the acronym, for all of their support. Also, thank you to the town for their support. I think the town really galvanized around the idea that high-quality literacy curriculum materials are really going to pay a huge impact for our students. So thank you for the community for that support. We've also already started up training in that area. We'll be launching an RMHS Tier 2 Academic Support Center based right here out of the high school in the library, which we think is going to be able to provide direct supports to students who need additional academic supports, interventions, which will start as a drop-in academic support center, but really over time use data and be more proactive about identifying student needs for both individualized and small group tutoring opportunities here in the Academic Support Center. Continue to move forward, new courses at RMHS, dual enrollment courses, which students, as you know, will leave with college credits in hand, which is we think makes them more competitive as they enter into the college world, and also it can be a big, huge financial save for them as they move on to the next level, and increases in computer science courses. We have Principal Tracy will be speaking about this, I'm sure, a couple of times this year, a major focus on leveraging our department heads as instructional leaders. For those of you who followed sort of the contract closely over the past couple of years, it was a major shift in the last contract negotiations to free up our department heads to take on more of an instructional leadership role. And we plan to move that work forward this year by having them take the lead on improving the quality of teaching and learning within their departments and moving more out of just more of an operational work. Again, more on that for the community to come. Middle school common assessments, we're partnering with iReady to be able to monitor our student progress and to be able to provide more targeted data-driven interventions for our students. Middle school literacy leadership team, following what happened at our elementary literacy leadership team, our middle school team will be exploring high quality curriculum materials to ensure that those are at the fingertips of our teachers. Seal of Biliteracy, if you're not familiar, it's a way for students to demonstrate their proficiency in multiple languages, demonstrate their skill as someone who's biliterate. So that'll be something we'll be able to recognize and celebrate at graduation, those students who are leaving RMHS with, again, as someone who is bilingual. And then our expanding partnerships with Endicott and Merrimack Fellows programs. For those who follow the budget cycle closely know that we have a full-time fellow now. We have an Endicott fellow who is now full-time at Killam, a Merrimack Fellow who's full-time now at JE. And we're excited about those continued partnerships to continue to improve the quality of teaching and learning in our classrooms. And then lastly, what we bucketed as sort of a miscellaneous bucket, projects and improvements. Metco expansion, been able to expand our Metco program by about 40 students, which we are thrilled about the impact that that will have. I also see that expansion not only will allow us to continue to create more diverse learning experiences for our students, but also we see the expansion came with significant funding that has allowed us to think creatively about some additional roles that can provide support to all of our students. We're going to talk a lot about Killam and MSBA tonight, but as a quick teaser, we're excited about moving that process forward, closer to the idea of having a brand new elementary in a few years. New website we'll speak about tonight. I'm excited about the committee's work that helped drive a potential path forward for moving towards universal full-day K. I know here we're celebrating moving about $900 cheaper from year before, but that means a lot to families, and we also know helps get in motion the plan for the future. All of our staff and behavioral health staff have been trained with Lynn Lyons to better support our students with anxiety. We're excited about continued increase in partnerships with community organizations around increasing adaptive sports opportunities. And then I shared a little bit today about the new RMHS Field and Track, which I know is not only something that's exciting for our RMHS students, but something for our entire community too. If you haven't driven by it, it looks wonderful. So we want to take a step back tonight just to share things that we've been talking about, to know these are still very much on our radar as we gear up and begin school in another day. Making a quick pivot, and I don't have a smooth transition here to move from exciting innovations to COVID, but we did share about a week ago protocols around COVID-19. So if anyone did not receive those, we're putting those up on our new website. Or if you have any questions, let us know. I want to talk through 4 things tonight that we think seem to generate the most conversations or questions. The first is around testing positive. So if you test positive, you're able to return back on day 6. And we're asking them when you return back on day 6 that you that means that you are symptom-free or you've been asymptomatic without the use, or symptom-free without the use of fever-reducing medication. And when you return prior to day 11, that the students are masked. And this is one we know is really difficult for us to enforce without knowing the exact date of the positive test, without knowing exactly when day 5 or 6 may be. So we're really asking for our community support. We all want to keep our schools open and keep our schools safe, so we need our community support in sort of upholding those protocols that we've shared out. Second is around exposure to COVID-19. So we no longer, in alignment with DESE and DPH, are requiring any sort of quarantine for anyone who's been a close contact, but we are asking those who have been close contacts to wear a mask for 10 days when they are around others at school. Symptomatic individuals, so we have test kits that are available, still take-home test kits. If you still have those ones from last year, you'll see in the guidance that we sent out, there's a website that you can check to make sure that those haven't expired. And while we won't be continuing test and stay, we are going to move forward and have symptomatics testing. So if a student is in school demonstrating symptoms, we can test them quickly to make sure to see if they're able to stay, or if they test positive, then they'll need to head home. And then lastly, reporting district and classroom cases. We will continue to share out cases at the district level on our website through a similar dashboard that we had last year. In terms of classroom cases, we can't, unfortunately, at this point, commit to notifying on every single positive case. For example, if a student in your child's middle school biology class has, that was a bad example, middle school biology, right? Middle school general science class, may have a tested positive. We will not notify under every circumstance, but our nurses will be tracking closely to see if there's situations that they deem that could be potential high risk for students. They will notify families. And also, if there's situations that could move into sort of more of a cluster within a class, within a team, within a group of students, our nurses will be making sure to communicate that. So again, there's a little bit of subjectivity here. We know that is difficult for families at times. We also ask that we trust our nurses, know our nurses are following this closely and are trying to provide as much information as they can in a timely way. You want me to pause here?
I have a question about the COVID protocol, so if you're switching gears.
I'm going to switch to another, yeah.
Okay. So I'm a little confused about the exposure expectation, because what are we calling exposure? So if we're not notifying families if the kid who sits next to my kid is positive, what are we calling exposure such that we're asking then that child to mask?
Great question. So, and let me start by sharing too that all of our protocols are in alignment with what DESE and DPH shared too. So a lot of, if I'm not able to answer it, then we can also certainly look there too. So this is a tricky one. So when we say exposure, I think Mary Giuliana will speak a lot about the highest risk of transmission is within household exposures too. So I think what we're really leaning into here is exposures that you know are in close contact with a student, most likely or most commonly in a household setting. You're right, if you don't have information, if someone sat next to you and had it, you're not able to act on that. We thought a lot about notifying in every situation, and I think here's what we came down to. At the middle and high school, it becomes too difficult with students just moving in and out of classes. Also, with DESE and DPH not recommending moving forward with contact tracing, it just became then a difficult process. So even then, we imagine in an elementary school class of 20 students, if there's a scenario where the nurse feels that there's two kids who are really close to each other throughout the day, the nurse may deem that to be a high-risk situation for a student and may call home. But it also may be difficult if a student says that or the family says my child tested positive, we're not contact tracing, so we can't go back and say, who were you sitting next to during this whole period? Was that child here or not here that day? Did you go to a small group reading class? Did you sit next to a music? They're not doing that same sort of protocol. So I think as we share that language, it's mostly around at-home transmission. But we also ask if we do tell you that, you've been on a team where there's been a significant amount of transmission, that's potential exposure as well in that circumstance. But also recognize that it is gray area and subjective in there, and again, asking for, families and their support.
Thanks for clarifying.
Can I ask a question on this as well? The symptomatic testing, I think families need to provide consent again this year, is that correct?
They do.
Right.
So how that will work is in our initial email, we sent out consent, but we also know that a lot of times getting consent in advance can be a little bit difficult. So how the process will happen is that if there's a child who demonstrates a symptom and they head down to the nurse's office, if they already do not have consent, the nurse will call home, get consent in that moment, then test and then send back. So right now, we have a smaller list of families who have already consented or provided consent. Thank you. You're proactive. Thank you for doing that. But we also recognize that that's going to grow as we have more situations that require that as well. And then one of the most difficult situations in those, which we've played out, just to be transparent with the community, if a child's demonstrating symptoms and the child and the family refuses consent, at that point the child will have to. We can't have the child return back to class. The child will have to, when available, to be able to return home. Because we can't have a child going back into class unless we're able to sort of confirm at that point that that's not a positive case. But we expect families to provide consent for symptomatic testing. We haven't had issues with that.
Please.
Is the consent yearly?
It is, unfortunately. So in last year, consent was all through CIC, as we know. So we had a Reading consent form and a CIC consent form. This year, everything is funneled through a Reading Public School form. And again, we know that these protocols were likely to shift as we go throughout the year. This is just where we're starting this last week. If we see a significant increase in cases, we'll be ready to pivot. And again, if things shift, we'll be ready to do things differently. So thank you for the community's understanding and support. And Mary, want to thank the community as well. And then lastly, just want to give a plea to the community that we are looking for staffing across a couple of different roles. We sent out an email about this earlier this week. We are looking for particularly paraeducators is still our biggest gap. This is something that is not just unique to Reading. This is something that many districts right now are seeing shortages in paraeducators. But if you know anyone who may potentially be interested, even if it's just sort of this time of the year to kick the year off, please let us know. Cafeteria manager, we're looking for one cafeteria manager, a couple of cafeteria workers. We've been able to close that gap over the past few days, which is exciting. A few tutors, and then as many substitute teachers who want to join our team are more than welcome to join our team. But again, thank you for everyone for helping to network and spread the word. Every time we've asked the community for support, the community's delivered in helping us to find staff. So those are all the back to school updates, and most importantly, we're thrilled to see our students back on Wednesday morning.
Great. Okay, so we are about 27 minutes ahead of schedule. Chuck, before we go to the track naming, are you anticipating any other members of that committee joining? And I've got a couple folks in the room already, but
Yeah.
I didn't know if you wanted to wait on that.
I told them 8:15-ish.
Okay.
But we can, keep the
Okay.
meeting going. I can speak for the committee.
Okay, great. Okay, so then we will move on to old business. So tonight is really the last step for us as a committee in a process that started back in the winter, I think, probably when Carl McFadden approached Tom with the suggestion and the nomination that the track be named for Hal Croft. And so I'll hand it off to you, Chuck, to talk about the advisory committee's work and share your recommendation, and then we'll move to discussion and vote.
Thank you, Sean. So first of all, Christine Talbot's in the room back there from the committee. And I'd like, the rest of the committee is John Means, who was a business member, business community member, Carlo Bacci from the Select Board, Principal Tracy, Olivia Rotundo, student representative, and myself. So we met twice. At the first meeting, I asked Carl McFadden to present similar as he had presented to the school committee, and then gave the committee an opportunity to ask questions. And from there, we made the decision that we should also, have a meeting where the public would have the ability to participate in the discussion, and we followed up with that meeting. And at that, we didn't really have a lot. It was everything's been positive from the beginning. And after we met and didn't have any public input, we took a vote. The committee took a vote to recommend to the school committee that we name the track after Hal Croft. And depending on what happens with this committee tonight, we would trying to target a September 30th, I think is the day. Yeah, it's the second home game in September, and Carl is going to help with kind of pulling together some pretty significant luminaries to be there, and that presentation would be before the football game. So I think, Christine, did I hit everything? Or, by the way, Christine's from the Historical Commission. I forgot to mention that. Great.
Okay, so our policy then requires that I do two things. One is we'll certainly open it up for any committee discussion, but to provide any members of the public that have anything else they want to say on this topic before we move to our discussion and vote, with that opportunity now. So this is that formal opportunity. I'm not seeing anybody racing to the podium. We're good? Okay. Any other discussion, questions from the committee before we take a motion? Carla.
I move that the Reading Memorial High School track be named after Mr. Hal Croft in recognition of his contributions and dedication to the Reading Public Schools and the track community, with a naming ceremony to be held at a later date.
Is there a second?
Second.
Chuck, seconds. Any further discussion before we move to the vote? All in favor? All opposed? It carries 5-0. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So Chuck, thank you for your leadership on this, and thank you to the members of the committee who are here tonight and those who weren't able to join us as well. That committee will formally sunset on Wednesday, I believe, so there's no sort of further action necessary on your part or our part as far as that goes. So thank you for the efforts to support this. We look forward to that ceremony in September.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's do this. We're going to need a minute to make sure that we have all the Zoom stuff in order as we move to the Killam discussion for this evening. So why don't I'll call a 10-minute recess. We'll plan to return at 8:05, and hopefully we'll have all the Zoom in order so we can get started, and we'll move on to the Killam discussion for this evening. So we are in recess. I will call the meeting back to order. Before we move on to the Killam content, Carla, if we could have a motion?
I move to take items E4 and E5 out of order.
And is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Tom. All in favor? Chuck, are you in favor of? Thank you. All opposed? Okay, so we'll take those out of order. So I want to just give a brief kind of overview for members of the community that may be watching of how we're going to approach these discussions around Killam over the next few meetings. So tonight, we're going to hear from Dr. Milichewski, Principal Levesque, Director of Facilities Joe Huggins on sort of the need and kind of how we got here in terms of the Killam project. We will then hear from GNAP Architects, our consulting architect, on some of the work that's been done to date to think through what the project may look like, what some of the options could look like, how we arrived at the number that we're going to be likely asking for before town meeting. So we'll go through most of the content and probably the most depth this evening. Next week on the Thursday, so it's September 8th, we'll have a public hearing. A public hearing is not required for this process. We're doing it purely just sort of, to make sure there's maximum awareness of what's going on and to make sure that we're doing all that we can to solicit public input. So the public hearing has already been posted last week, and then it's posted again this week in the local press. We'll certainly publicize it on our Facebook pages and so forth. And the intent of the public hearing is really just to give the public an opportunity to share their perspective on the question that's before us, which is largely around presenting a warrant article to town meeting for consideration for a feasibility study. Certainly, folks can comment on the broader scope of the project that would, imply as well. But the sort of immediate question before us is around pursuing the feasibility study. So next week when we have the hearing, we'll do a very light version of what you're going to hear tonight in terms of the background and why we're here. And then on the 15th, we'll give sort of the community an opportunity to continue to chew on it, provide any feedback or any questions that they might have. And then on the 15th, we as a committee will take a vote to submit a warrant article to the select board for inclusion in the warrant in November for subsequent town meeting. So that's a little bit of how it will unfold. After we hear the presentations tonight, I'll share with you the draft warrant article and motion that we have in place now and where we are in terms of progressing that. But we're not going to have any discussion or vote on it tonight. It's just sort of for informational purposes at this point. So I think I hit everything I wanted to say before we jump in. So Dr. Milichewski, I will hand it to you.
Thank you. In just a couple of minutes, I'm going to turn it over to Dale Gienap to walk us through sort of where we've been on this project over really the past couple of years, and then also to give an understanding to the community of where are we going over the next couple of years. Before we do that, I think Joe Huggins, Sarah Levesque, and I want to share a little bit about just the need in the Killam building and make sure that we're all on the same page, which is sort of why is this an urgent need for our community. So to start, I think that it's obvious to the community this is an amazing opportunity to be at this phase in the process and to have a commitment of funding, of significant funding to support the build of a brand new building. I think as we know is not an opportunity that comes frequently and one that is extremely competitive. I know Gienap will get into some of the numbers behind that, but this is a real amazing opportunity for our community in front of us. And I think we think also a real significant need. So we've heard conversations around sort of enrollment projections, things like that, but tonight I think what we want to speak is what we think are the two driving needs in our community at Killam, which is one, just the facility and some of the major deficiencies in the way that impacts the student experience at Killam, and also some of the ways that the current building does not meet our programmatic needs for effectively supporting all of our students. So tonight I'm going to turn it over to Joe Huggins, who's going to speak a little bit on that facilities end and what are some of those we feel urgent needs that impact our students. And then also turn it over to Sarah Levesque, who's going to speak a little bit about just from the programmatic side. And I would invite the committee members who I know have been a part of this process over the past couple of years to be able to share anything that we may miss in this part as well. So I'll turn it over to Joe Huggins.
And Joe, I see you live. You should be able to take yourself off mute.
Can everybody hear me now?
We can.
Yes, sir.
So everybody knows, Killam is the only school in town that has not received any major renovation at all. Built in 1967, it has been well maintained by by the facilities department over the years, and we have taken part in one MSBA Green School Repairs Program where we put a new roof on it in 2010, as well as some major upgrades to the heating system. New windows are also part of that MSBA Green School Repair Program, and new clear story windows. However, there are deficiencies because the building is getting tired. The biggest one is the ADA compliance. The building is not fully ADA compliant. A lot of the areas, such as the high D areas out back, the bathrooms in the building are not ADA compliant, as well as a lot of the entry points to the classrooms and other common areas, including the stage over at Killam. So it doesn't function well like that, and that's why we endeavor to bring a building like that up to speed. Like I said, we have maintained the building. We have been putting capital money into the building over the years. The windows and the doors are largely original to the Killam School. We have replaced several of them over the years, but a lot of the windows are the old single pane windows that are not energy efficient and do create a lot of draftiness in the building. And again, that's a large project when you're talking about 70,000 square foot elementary school. One of the other big hurdles over there is the lead in the drinking water. As everybody knows, we are part of the LCCA program that is run by the water department in Reading, and we do regular monitoring of all of our school buildings. The way we've mitigated that is to follow certain protocols in the cooking areas of the building, as well as to provide drinking water through water bubblers that we spring water bubblers throughout the whole building over there. And again, this is another very costly project. We would have had to replace all the piping within the building to fix that. The building is not it's not sprinkled. There is no fire suppression. There is a fire alarm system, which allows us, it's a fully addressable panel. But again, under today's standards, you want a fully fire suppressed building with an addressable panel. We only have the addressable fire panel, which I guess we're grandfathered because of that. So we do have fire protection, but no fire suppression over there in Killam. A lot of what you see over at that particular building, in terms of the way it's laid out, does not allow good access sight lines to the main office for security reasons. A lot of the newer schools, the MSBA designs have direct sight lines to the main doors of the building, and at Killam we do not have that. So from a security standpoint, that would be something that would be upgraded through an MSBA project also. We do have some issues with water infiltration, not through the roof, but around the foundation. In some areas of the building, which is just a component of the age of the building, settling and things like that. There are a few classrooms, I believe one or two that Sarah could mention, that are only accessible by going through another classroom, which again, is the way the building was laid out originally, which is really not opportune to, for teaching and learning over there. So those are some of the highlights from a facility standpoint of the challenges we have over there. We continue to maintain the building as it sits, but there are some large projects. If you add them all together and start to do these projects, what would happen is if you hit 20% of the assessed value of a facility, all these other requirements are going to kick in. ADA, there's fire suppression, seismic, Dale could talk more to that, but there's a whole list of items that would have to be upgraded that would be very costly to renovate a building like the Killam. And you have to be careful when you're doing a single renovation. I believe it's over, correct me if I'm wrong, Dale, is it over a 1 year or a 2 year period for that? So the whole building would have to be brought up to current standards in the building code. So it's Killam, it's like I said, it's reached the end of its useful life in our eyes.
Thank you, Joe. I also think that's important coming from someone who I think the facilities department's done such a good job maintaining and really poured a lot into keeping the building in usable shape at this point. But I think as Joe said, is at this point, we have major concerns just with the deficiencies that Joe described. So I turn over to Sarah, who's just going to speak, shifting from the physical sort of building, also then moving into some of the ways that it may not be meeting our programmatic needs.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Biliteracy, and Joe, we appreciate that. You know, I could absolutely echo everything Joe was saying, but I think from an educational standpoint, we do an exceptional job making sure our kids are ready and getting the education they deserve, and we know we can do some things better if we had the ability to do that in our physical building, and we do have some limitations there. I think the biggest piece that we see are the complexities of our students that are entering our building at this point. To Dr. Milichewski's point, although we don't necessarily see our enrollment growing exponentially in terms of number of students, what our kids are coming into are more complex and require more space, more needs, more educational settings for them. And we quite frankly are being as creative as we can, but we've kind of hit our max point at this point. So we have, to what Joe alluded to, our building is a pretty open concept building compared to many of the schools here, meaning we have shared spaces in the middle of all of our wings, which allow student access points to go out and do group work, which is something we appreciate, but because it's open, we're unable to think of it in terms of a space for special education needs, in terms of a space for our multilingual learners. Our shared group opportunities are wide open and loud, and we want to be respectful of our students that are there. So we do the best we can by creating natural barriers with furniture and you know, different kind of temporary walls that we're putting up, but it is a temporary solution, and we just see that our small group space is more and more critical as we talk about making sure that our kids are getting what they need. In terms of just general education students, even along that same line, you hear a lot of the talk about Tier 2 supports, which is really thinking about when our students who are gen ed students just need that little extra push or maybe an extra concept review. We want a space where they feel protected and welcome to be able to learn, and we do not have that anymore. We are using essentially hallway spaces, which is not your most conducive space for a student to try to gain that access. In terms of our programmatic needs, you know, we are seeing that we are converting essentially some older closet spaces into learning spaces if we can. So we have a space on our stage that is an office at this point. It was a closet prior to, you know, it was, I should say, it was an office space when I joined, but it's clear that it was a closet at one point, but we've had to create this space. So we're looking at places that don't have windows, that have, you know, low ventilation in there, the heating system. So it does impact our staffing needs. We're also looking at it from, as Dr. Milichewski and Joe alluded to, we have some of our rooms are only accessible by walking through other rooms. So that is limiting what we can do in those rooms. Of course, we want to be in compliance with what our state regulations say in terms of what student populations can be in there, but it means that we can't think creatively about moving our staff and students around our building to make sure they have the best learning experience. We have shared spaces for many of our staff, so our learning center space currently has 3 staff members in there. That we are trying to make sure, again, that we are creating the best environment for our kids, but that is the space we have at this point. I would say when we look at our occupational therapy, our physical therapy space, our speech and language space, we are sharing small spaces and being creative about what day are you here, what day are you here. So really trying to maximize with our schedules what we can do, but we simply don't have any more room to expand without creating more of an issue with these temporary spaces and relocating something. You'll hear storage is a major concern for us. We have this incredible curriculum that we continue to get, and we just are having trouble figuring out where can we put this safely so that we're in compliance with fire codes. How can we do this in a way that doesn't look like we're cluttered, right? That we have access to everything, but it simply is not easy to do at this point. The other piece, I think, is when we start talking about the RISE preschool. We're very fortunate. We have 2 of our classrooms in here. We love having our RISE preschool students in here. anytime we expand in that way, we're talking about more, not only classroom space for our kids, but more space for special education services, more space for outdoor play, everything that we want to give the students a robust experience. And again, we have at this point maxed out what we're able to do, and we'd love to be able to do more. And so I think that is a big piece of the discussion we're trying to have of, do we think about one space for our youngest students to be, so we can really maximize not only our potential with our staff, but our opportunities for those students. So again, I think that we are doing the best we can with what we have, but we know we want to be nimble and we want to be able to shift to the changing needs. And it's very challenging to do when we know it would be major costs or major projects to try to do so. And, we want to make sure that all of our kids, whether you're at Killam or you're at Joshua Eaton, are getting a similar experience. And I think that's a big push for us at this point.
Thank you, Sarah.
Sure.
Just a question. I'd like to call the Killam Building Committee to order, because we have a quorum. Could I have a second? Second, if I may. Thank you.
No, absolutely.
Great, so before we turn over to Geenep, then, we wanted to have the chance to, again, share about some of the physical deficiencies in the building, hear about some of the programmatic concerns that we have, but we'd love to open up to the committee to see if you had any thoughts or anything you'd like to add on to what's been shared.
Go ahead, Tom.
I guess I'll start. We're all like, who's going to say something first? So first of all, Joe, and, I appreciate the update there, and, Sarah as well. It's important for us to think about this and step back and say, what are the real problems we're addressing? And the physical plant is a huge portion of that real problem, and the educational ability is the second big portion. I fear, and when we go through Dale's presentation, we're going to kind of cloud some of the things of what the problem is, and I want to make sure that we as a committee are pushing the right buttons about what it is actually the reason for it. So, as we think about that, I want to make sure we kind of back off some things that are said in the existing presentation, but also really focus on heavily hitting some of the real problems there. The fact that for 6-7 years now, we've had kids at Killam going to school with lead in the water is not acceptable. The fact that we have staff members in closets is not acceptable. The fact that we have classrooms in locker rooms of the gym is not acceptable. The fact that we cannot, have space properly for our special education programs, and they're either potentially opening us up to an OCR, which we've had happen at Joshua Eaton, or other type of problems is not acceptable, right? And the fact that we have this opportunity as a town to really step back and look at this properly for a building that is now 55 years old, never once modified in a large sense to accommodate things, and in a design that frankly is outdated, right? From an educational perspective is huge. And I think we really need to focus in on those core items as we talk through this. We will get lost in the morass if we start talking about enrollment and other things along those lines, which is not the problem here. The increase in kindergarten classrooms is not the problem here. We really need to talk about what the programmatic needs are, how the building is functional or not, in this case, very not functional, and forward think in terms of what we need from a space perspective. Whether it's RISE, which is up for discussion as a group, special education is not up for discussion, EL is not up for discussion, and making sure that we have the right space for our children in the future is not up for discussion either. So we have a lot to work through, but I really hope that we tune in and focus in on those key points, because those salient points are what we need to sell this and push it forward from a town perspective, first for town meeting, then the greater vote at the super level from a town perspective.
Go ahead, Erin.
So I had the privilege of visiting Killam last year with Dr. Biliteracy, and you're absolutely right that there is something very special happening there, and I think you've been extremely creative, really creative, with what you have to work with there. But I knew a lot of this. I don't even know that I knew all of this, and it's hard to hear that this is one of our current buildings where we're trying to meet the needs of all our students. And I think Tom hit the nail on the head, is that like there's really two pieces to this building project. One is the actual physical condition of Killam. So I appreciate you and Joe really articulating that for everyone. But the other is the programmatic needs in our district and at Killam and potentially at Rise. And I think that we do, some people are a little distracted by the enrollment conversation, and it's not so much about whether our numbers have changed in the last decade plus, but our students have changed, and the way we are meeting the needs of our students has changed. We are keeping more kids in district, and that is to be celebrated. That is a positive, but with that comes the need for more spaces, and to legally make sure we are genuinely meeting those needs requires a lot more classroom spaces. So I think that is the other really important piece here. So there's, to me, there's like sort of two buckets there. So I'm glad that we are talking about this and highlighting this. I think, it doesn't underscore that Killam as a community is a wonderful place, but it does emphasize that, we need to do better for those kids.
Chuck?
So I think Tom was spot on. I think from a historical perspective, we couldn't really, and Dale can correct me if I'm wrong, we couldn't really go to MSBA unless we had an enrollment problem. And they've kind of evolved into a different organization and what they'll accept and focus. So now is the time where they'll listen to our story about our changing program and the, because if you walk through Killam as with the, the things that Joe mentioned, the building still looks immaculate, right? So again, that in the past, MSBA would go through there and see that and say, we can't. So now with their changes is the time to do this and focus on the things other than enrollment, because if that's what we had to sell, we couldn't sell that. So I think that's important.
Carla?
Thank you for the presentation.
Absolutely.
All three of you. This isn't just a problem for Killam, right?
Correct.
This is a problem with our district. And when we talk about programmatically, it will help our entire district. And I know Dale's going to get into that in his presentation. So this building project, which is an incredible opportunity financially, doesn't just help Killam students. So we have to kind of think of this as a whole. Another piece that Joe had mentioned was the 20%. Once you start those renovations on that building, once you hit 20%, which if you need to replace windows and doors and it's not ADA compliant and you're setting up barriers, physical barriers to try and create spaces, that kicks us into a different level of financial pressure. So, and once again, encouraging town meeting members to come on the 8th, September 8th for our meeting. We're going to be allowing people into the school to show them around. We want people to come prepared, get all their information before town meeting. So when we come to town meeting, we've already kind of gone through our thought process.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Just say one, and I guess another point that can't be overemphasized is, we're potentially getting 40 cents on the dollar. I mean, that's big, rather than just going out and asking for the full amount of the building, and that needs to be really understood by the community. And like it was when we built this school, I think it was 60%, Joe, maybe something like that, or 55.
I'm not sure. I'm really not sure what the exact number is, to be honest. I know it was over 50% now.
I was told 53, I think.
Yeah, so that's important. That's really important to emphasize.
I think you all said it well. I just want to amplify one thing that Carla mentioned. We are going to be doing targeted outreach to town meeting members, should we move forward with the warrant article as well, to provide opportunities to come to the building and sort of see for themselves some of these challenges. And I know you and your team will be very effective at demonstrating those in real time. My daughter was at Killam this year, and I've had the opportunity to visit as a school committee member a few times as well. And it's a phenomenal environment, and you all do a great job there, but those challenges are pretty easy to see when you're walking the halls. So we'll bring that to life for town meeting members who choose to avail themselves of those opportunities when they come, so.
Yeah, thank you. And Carla, I appreciate your point, and I want to echo that. I think that when we make an investment in one school, we're making an investment in all our schools. And I think it's very easy to say, this is only for the Killam district. And as much as that is deserved and wanted and warranted, it's really too bad to feel like you can't say yes to everything because of, as we spoke about, some of these limitations we have. And no child deserves that, right? We have a right to say to our kids, we're going to give everything we can to you. And that's what we want to do. And I think this only adds value to our school district and adds value to our town if we invest this correctly.
That was really well said. And I just wanted to echo, as Principal Levesque said, about the spaces for our multi-language learners, OT, speech, PT. All of that is contained within tiered focus monitoring. It's part of our civil rights tiered focus monitoring, which we are going to be having site visits for. And so the state is going to be coming out and actually walking through Killam to make sure that you're not walking through one classroom to get to another. You're not, that there are equitable spaces for all learners. And so all of the things we talked about here tonight are what we are anticipating is going to come back as part of this TFM as issues that we're going to need to address in conjunction with, as Joe was talking about, the ADA compliance. Because as it stands right now, if a student, for whatever reason, ends up in a wheelchair at Killam and they would like to be part of a show, we can't necessarily get them up on the stage in an effective manner. And so we need to think about all of those pieces. So there is also a tie to this greater piece of work that's happening with the state as well. I just wanted to highlight that.
Okay, Tom, do we want to transition to Dale and team? Great. So Dale, I think you're still with us. You should be able to go live. If you take yourself off mute, you should be able to share as well.
Okay, I can share my screen?
Yep, if you give it a shot, we'll tell you if it worked or not, or.
All right. It says host is disabled screen sharing.
Host is disabled screen sharing. That's me, so give me a second.
Sorry.
Let's see.
That's why it's a trial run.
Yep.
Yep.
We do have, I think we could probably pull up your presentation here if we need to.
I think you might have to, because if you share it, anybody participating can share it.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay.
It's not really.
You have to present him to co-host or something.
All right. Can we make him a co-host? Would that do it?
I think if you do the pull-down menu for participants, there's a place that you can allow me to share screen.
Yeah, we're looking for that here.
How was your trip? Great. Really, it's in the setting. Zoom itself.
Or is it in the security settings, perhaps?
We can talk about references.
Allow participants to share. There we go. We're almost there.
There I go.
Okay.
So you just want to make sure you take.
Yeah, we'll turn that off right after. Yeah, that's a good catch. Okay. Okay, we can see your screen. It's a desktop background. There we go.
You have a signal that says MSBA process?
We do.
Yes.
We do.
Okay, so I'll walk through what I was asked to do, and, you know, done before, is just real quick about sort of the MSBA process, but first a brief summary of the status we are in now, a little bit about how we got here, and then what the next steps are for this current phase, and then about beyond that, we can talk about to whatever extent you may choose to. So the first thing that happened is you were invited into the eligibility period. So the MSBA really looks at, they have modules 1 through 9. There's 8 shown here, and 9th one is reviewing the building afterwards. But it really breaks into 3 phases. The first that you're in now is preparation. So getting ready to then launch into design, study and design of the building. The second is that study and design, and then the third one is actually final design, meaning getting the permits and doing the construction. So the step that you're at, which I'm sure you're familiar with, is the statement of interest. So that, and congratulations to the school and town administration for making that happen and being prepared and well thought through. Because you were one of 17 of 118 schools that submitted for statement of interest for what is referred to as the core program, meaning it is distinguished from the maintenance program. It's just boilers and so on. So there's someone I heard say earlier, there is a lot of competition for this, and in fact there is. So congratulations, and it indicates the town's understanding, or the MSBA's understanding, that this is really needed. So there is a period now for 100 or 270 days to get through this eligibility period. That's to get a number of things ready to go into the initial study and design of the building. The MSBA allows 270 days. You receive notice June 1st, which means the time is through February 26th, so you have about twice as long to go as currently been spent, 13 out of about 27 weeks left. In talking earlier with the school committee, or the school building committee, and the town manager, I understand you are well into this process and on track, and so there does not seem to be a concern about making those timelines. What I'd like to do is back up a little bit about how you got to where you are, and comment that we were asked earlier through work with the town to look at a master plan for the elementary schools. And I want to just call attention to that because it is different than the feasibility study that will happen in the next step. So the master plan was really understanding that there is an issue of space in particular that was impacting the educational abilities at all of the elementary schools that someone mentioned before. It did not start out with a bias or a focus on Killam, but rather what are the issues in terms of enrollment and educational space across all of the elementary schools. And just acknowledging that, and where do we go, what do we do, what do we do, 2 schools, 5 schools, 1 school, and trying to get an understanding of what were planning options that would address your needs. So what we did, working with the school administration and the town at a certain level, was first of all, when looking at these planning options, you really try to look for 20 years. You really try to think 50 years, but of course you don't want to build space that you don't need for 40 years. So it's really a 20-year projection. And the other thing in particular for Reading was to acknowledge the pre-K program. When we started out, it was, felt it was not necessarily mandated that we have a solution for the pre-K, but it certainly is an integral part of the elementary school and the broader school system, and at least should be thought about during the process. So what we did to get a handle on all of this was we included NESDEC, New England Schools, that does enrollment projections pretty much across the state. It's a separate entity. And we looked at those for the next 10 to 15 years. Then we studied the existing building capacity, so looked at the actual bricks and mortar at all of the elementary schools, and we folded in actually the pre-K at the high school, to see what those in the abstract they could accommodate in terms of students and programs. And from that, we looked at what the space needs were. We really looked at that for the enrollment and the programs that you want to do, and what kind of space is needed, and then compared that to the existing building. And it just distinguished that. It's different than trying to say, we have a space, what could we stick in there? But really looking at what, I hate to say ideal, but what the educational space would look like if you weren't hampered by an existing building. And that was looked for the enrollment and the educational. And then from all of that, look to see what kind of planning options were available working with the 5 buildings. So what we found is that the space needs really occurred out of 2 things, and I should sort of say 3. One is the enrollment only constitutes, in terms of the next 10 years, a growth of about 6% in actual enrollment numbers. Now, COVID, may has impacted that a slight amount, but the reality is what is being seen across systems is that it's probably not a significant long-term impact. That's an increase for you of about 115 students. Now, 6% doesn't sound like much, maybe 115 doesn't sound like much, but that's 7 to 8 classrooms, and you have 5 elementary schools, so it's 1.5 to 2 classrooms depending on the district or which school. So that's a significant impact, even though it sounds very small. And then of course there's the dramatic increase with the pre-K program. But then programming, we just took and looked at since all of the schools were done, most of them have been done, as you know, except for Killam over the past 15 years. So we took that time frame and looked at the introduction of special education needs and so on. And as the numbers indicate there's about 29 classrooms across the elementary school, across the district, that have been absorbed for changes in educational. Special education tends to get the attention on that, but it's a little bit unfair. As you can see, half as many were impacted by kindergarten classrooms, and 12 for kindergarten and pre-K compared to 17 for special education. It's also hard to be extremely specific with the special education because general education has changed. Computers are used differently over 15 years. I don't think anyone can debate that. Libraries, multimedia types of things, and places for students to do things and have activities that just didn't exist 15 years before. So it really, these 2 things together, you end up with about 29 and another 8 classrooms for enrollment. So it ends up about a 35% increase of educational space needed since these buildings were most recently done. So it's really telling you, across all of your 5 districts, in total, you should have another 30 to 40% of educational space. So that was one of the starting points that we came from. Now, we looked at a number of options that I'll walk you through briefly, and it really came down to 2 that were sort of declared as the advantageous options versus non-advantageous options. And it really, those are Scheme A and Scheme B that we'll look at. And they are focused on the Killam building. And I really shouldn't say the Killam building, but the Killam site.
Dale, if I may.
That didn't come
Dale, just 1 second.
Starting out thinking this was a Killam project. But
Dale,
rather
can you hear me?
looking at all the schools and all the sites. And in fact, the focus to the Killam site became largely because of the site as much as the building. It was, somewhat a coincidence that's also the building that's had the least work done on it. And so, as an example, everyone's familiar with the Birch Meadow School. If you can see my mouse towards the rear of Birch Meadow, there was a little bit of space where the town recently put the modulars for the second time. Wood End, there is some space available on that site. to the side of the school. It's not as sort of large and open as one might think because of some soil conditions and the hill and et cetera. However, it is a possibility, but one of the things that limited the opportunities for the Wood End site is access to the site. The roads that lead there are not major. It's, sort of smaller streets, and you've experienced that. You think about buses and so on. It would be a possibility. But it's also sort of remote from where the majority of the population is and the growth through the schools. The Barrow site, because of the slope, the configuration, and a number of things, has limited opportunities for expansion of the footprint while still maintaining the play fields. And the Joshua Eaton site also has limitations, as you can sort of see from the diagram, this sort of pinch point. There have been additions to that site. The playgrounds are actively used in the back. So the open space and consideration to put additional square footage on that site, the access to it from the front of the school becomes somewhat difficult. Nonetheless, we did look at the possibility for expansion at all of these areas. This Scheme A, as we came to call it, is a solution that creates a single new building on the Killam site. It becomes an enrollment of like 700 plus students. This did provide for the opportunity through the other schools to incorporate the pre-K program and its needs in different locations. And it would require a limited amount of redistricting. One of the sort of givens that we tried to work with also was to try to keep classes and schools together, so that if you are with a classmate in any elementary school, you would all go to the same middle school. So that was not a hard, fast rule, but it was one of the things that we looked at.
Dale, could I
sorry,
interject?
This scheme did not address the pre-K.
Dale, could I interject for a second? Can you hear me?
Very.
Sorry, thank you. I just wanted to note, it looks like one of the kinks we need to work out, it doesn't seem like RCTV can see the presentation. So if anybody's following along at home, it looks like there are some folks doing so. This content is in the packet, which you can find on readingma.gov. If you scroll to the calendar at the bottom and click on today's date, you'll see the school committee is one of the meetings that will pop up. So if anybody wants to follow along, particularly this portion of the presentation is quite visual, you can find it in the packet. Sorry, Dale, go ahead.
Okay, and I think maybe someone, please interrupt me if you have questions, and it's very hard to see. Once I put this thing on my screen, it's hard to see if you're raising a hand or something, so please feel free to jump in. Scheme B was sort of a path on that. Scheme A, where we talked about 700 student elementary school, we would prefer to have a smaller school, or, the anticipation is. This was a scheme of looking at a new building at Killam, but also a building addition at the Birch Meadow School. So there is a somewhat magic number in the 600 to 650 student range. Most of your schools are smaller than that. But that being said, it's because one gymnasium, one cafeteria, one kitchen, those sorts of things sort of readily accommodate a 650 student elementary school. When you get bigger, you have to sort of increase some of the core facilities. So your schools are smaller. The idea would be to do that. Again, this does not handle all of the pre-K. And I apologize, but we kind of need to take a side step here because it's a very important aspect. The MSBA policy is that they will only work with a town that's a reimbursement project, one project at a time. That means if you're awarded money for a project, you go through that process, occupy the building, it's complete, it's audited, and then you can apply for an additional project. Now, there are many towns that people will know that are doing 3 or 4 schools at a time. It's absolutely true, but only one of those will be MSBA funded. We work with a couple of towns that are doing a new school, that's in the reimbursement program, and just because of their needs, they have to simultaneously be doing 2 other schools at the same time, and those are, at 100% town or municipality costs. They're not getting MSBA reimbursement. That's important at this, understanding the difference here, because, as I say, the first scheme is looking at, not the pre-K, but accommodating all elementary school with one building project, all of which would be, assuming we pass the eligibility period, eligible for reimbursement. If it's a 2-site, and even though this is one project, or one, coherent solution, it's still 2 sites, it's considered 2 projects. So either, say, the other project like Birch Meadow would be done at town's cost, or it would be the Killam project, for instance, and I'm assuming you would do Killam first because that would be the larger reimbursement, would be a significant, that would be a significant reimbursement, but you would probably have to get through that process, and you'd be in the 7 years or to 10 years before then you would complete that project, be awarded, the second project, go through that process, design, construction, and everything. So, it would be a substantial period. So either there's no objection by MSBA to do it ahead of time at your own cost, but it would not be eligible for reimbursement. So that is a significant factor. We also, through this process, looked at, a number of schemes that we really declared were not advantageous. And my initial discussion with the school committee was that, we don't really come forward exactly with a recommendation, but rather try to, find the situations, the conditions, what they may be, because there are other factors besides, the educational aspect and bricks and mortar for a town, a school committee to determine if they're advantageous or not. And so some of those factors, we probably looked at, 20 schemes all in all. But, to give you a feel for, this list is there, but I'll just give you a real quick rundown. We did look at trying to do renovation at Killam and then a larger addition at Birch Meadow. And then these arrows indicated, these are all in the package, and I can slow down if you wish, but, a lot more redistricting. It still did not address pre-K. We looked at a scheme of trying to, as I mentioned, there is a sort of efficiency with elementary schools around 650 students. And as it turns out, even with your growth, you would have one a little bit bigger, but just from that math, 4 schools would be a consideration. So we looked at, based on zoning, could you actually vacate the Birch Meadow site and do a larger project in different places? That was looked at. Again, it was kind of determined to not be an advantageous, again, partly because of the access to Wood End, and the other, one of the other keys to that being that it's not located where your growth, your current core population is, nor your growth, so it would mean more transportation of students to schools. We looked at, combining that, again, with a bigger school and but still trying to vacate, do one. We looked at actually a whole new school at Birch, and that essentially to make the schools more of similar size and not have a single larger school, was to replace Birch Meadow with a larger school to try to equal them out across the board. Wood End still stays a little bit smaller, again, because of its location. But this was one scenario that was considered. It has impacts on reimbursement, as well as, at what time do the most students get served by, new educational space. We looked at, other schemes that were kind of declared not advantageous. One was to find an additional site for, say, an early childhood center. And with the pre-K and K there, we looked at other combinations of that as well. And that cleared up this, more space within the schools, in order to accommodate the enrollment and the space needs. And there were some issues with that. One is it takes additional staffing. It means moving kids around. It means, pre-K younger kids may not be able to go to school with their older siblings. Those kinds of considerations. And probably, at the crux of it is there is no sixth site that the town has been able to find that would be a candidate for either a new school or even just a pre-K early childhood center. We did a similar thing, looking at an additional site as well as the 2 locations in order to try to keep the enrollments down. So we can go back through those at any level you may want to, but that's what led, it was really that process that led it back to being, as I say, it became evident that the Killam site, because of accessibility, space, and a few other things, became sort of the focus, and that translated into, in all likelihood, a new school on that site. With that, would you like me to pause there, or we can kind of go on through? That's how we got, or you got to where you are, and accepted into the eligibility period that we now need to bring forward.
Yep, we do have at least one question here. Go ahead, Chuck.
Hi, Dale. This is Chuck Robinson. To what extent can you provide scheme costs, specifically Scheme A, in today's dollars? I mean, these are 3 years, with inflation. I mean, do you have the ability to put together we're going to need that. We're going to need that for our talking points.
We could update that, to everybody's best thinking. These were probably done, better part of 2 years ago now. But yeah, we can do that, and just obviously in the context of even communities that have construction documents done, ready to go to bid, are wondering what it's going to cost now. And we see many projects that were in the process 2 or 3 years ago, that the cost has gone up, of course, COVID and, impacted all that, but we could update that.
Well, we have to. I mean, we can't present, a 3-year-old number to the other question, can I just ask?
Please.
Do those numbers contemplate, I remember you, or I think it was you that talked about that MSBA has I don't want, probably not the right description, like cookie cutter type buildings, models. Do those construction costs contemplate using their off-the-shelf plans, I guess?
I'll say generally not.
Okay.
But it would be sort of premature to do that. And so maybe it's,
Fair.
actually, remind me, I'd like to kind of have Imelda walk through kind of the steps we're in now, because there's a very key point about that that is relevant to go back to talk to, but probably going through those steps would be helpful.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, so just sort of talking about the MSBA process. So Dale already talked about this sort of image before. This is published on the MSBA website, and it goes through all of their tasks, which they identify as modules. And they're sort of in 3 phases. You have the preparation, the scope definition, and then the scope monitoring. And at the end of the first 2 phases, you have funding authorizations. And that's to fund the next phase. So at the end of the preparation phase, you need to vote to fund the scope definition phase. At the scope definition phase, you have to vote to fund the scope monitoring. And so, kind of like what Dale was saying earlier, right now you're in the eligibility period. So right now you're gathering information, doing the initial compliance certification, putting together your school building committee, which you've already done, doing the educational profile and enrollment process, which is underway, getting the maintenance and capital planning documents, which is also underway, and then getting the authorization to fund the next phase. So you could turn the slide. Yep, so this is just a agreement of that. So again, just looking at the timeline, the eligibility period is maximum 270 days. So the times on this slide are all maximums. MSBA typically, if districts can go faster than this, MSBA typically goes along with it, with certain exceptions. They do want you to take an appropriate amount of time on design. In total, it's a 3.5-year timeline, so you're already into that a certain amount, which is good. In the eligibility period, there's a bunch of different tasks that you need to accomplish. So this is sort of a quick to-do list. I know only one thing right now is checked off, but we understand that many of these items are either in progress or maybe even completed. A big part of this is the funding of the next phase. That is the scope definition phase, so modules 2 through 5. So I can go into a lot more detail about each of these modules, but basically you need to form the project team. So that's hiring an OPM, it's hiring a designer. We have a contract with MSBA where we do peer review, and we do technical services for them. So we would not be selected as the designer because we're not eligible for it, but you would be selecting a designer, and then you'd be going into a feasibility study, which is module 3, where you are specifically looking at options for Killam and how to do it and what are the cost-benefit analysis. For example, like one of the things that you have to do in the feasibility study, it's an MSBA standard, is look at doing a renovation addition. They want to make sure that you look at sort of every aspect, every single possibility that's out there for the building. And what comes out of that is you basically determine what is your preferred option, and you take that into module 4, which is schematic design, and you go a little bit more in depth on that. And you do a lot of testing, you develop the drawings and the design further, you get a much more refined cost estimate, much more refined project budget. And this is very important because what comes out of the schematic design is something called the project scope and budget, a PSD. And that determines what MSBA's percentage is going to be. And that determines what's called the project funding agreement, which is the literal agreement that is signed between the district, the town, and MSBA. And that defines how much money and in what situations MSBA comes back and reimburses the town for. So this is a very important phase in the project. And so it is very important that this phase be sufficiently funded to make sure that you can do all of the testing and everything that you need to do to make sure that your cost estimate accounts for things. So sort of one example of that is you might need to do another traffic analysis if you go through the process and you're trying to decide between 2 and 3 curb cuts, or depending on how the building is configured. In one design, you might have thought that the whole building was going to be on one side of the site, and then in another design, you're thinking that like a piece of it is somewhere else, so you need to do some more testing of what's in the ground over in a different area. And so it's very important to make sure that you have sufficient funding for this. And so when we're talking about funding this, what you're really funding here is the designer's fee, the OPM's fee, and then some reimbursable costs, so printing and stuff like that, and then a lot of the testing, so the geotechnical, the traffic studies, hazardous material for demolition. And so for a project like yours, this was sort of an example estimate that we pulled together based off of recent projects that have gone through the MSBA. So all of this information is really great. MSBA publishes this, so you can really see what comparable projects are to your project. And sort of based on that, what we think for readying what you need to do to fund the next phase is about $2.2 million. And that should cover all of these different things for the next phase. And this is sort of the breakdown of it. And this has been escalated, you can kind of see at the bottom, it's been escalated to 2022 numbers. So it carries a 10% escalation in there. Oh, Dale, you're talking, but you're muted.
And just to amplify that, it's important to understand, certainly this is an investment in planning in the future, but if you fund this, you don't have to spend it all in this phase. I mean, this is to provide that you're prepared to do all those things that Melda mentioned. But if it's not necessary, that money, you can carry that forward into your additional phase. It won't increase your overall, outlay for the project ultimately. But it really is, a very major thing, and I just want to back up for a second, because Melda did cover it very clearly, but it's so critical. You're in this bar, and the funding that we're talking about, the $2.2 million, is sort of this box. But what you're funding is these tasks that are going to happen here. It's not the construction that you're funding. So, if you don't need everything that you appropriated here, it just can go on to the later phases, assuming, you proceed with the project. But that point that Melda made, maybe you just want to restate it again, explain a little bit about one more time about the project scope and agreement there, because that's so fundamental.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, it's kind of just a sort of basic idea of like, you form the team, you do a feasibility study, you select what option you want to do for Killam, and then you do a deeper dive with the schematic, and it's just so important that cost estimate be accurate and be escalated correctly, and because everything that comes out of the schematic design determines what MSBA will fund. And so, which is Module 5. And so sort of to the point that was addressed earlier, if you were to do a model school, this next phase doesn't get shorter. Basically, part of this next phase, you determine that you want to do a model school. And MSBA has to come in and look at the project and see whether or not they think it's appropriate, which of their model schools they think would be an appropriate model school to use against it. And what it ends up doing, it affects the third phase, the scope monitoring, once you go into the detailed design. Because if you're using a model school, you know a lot of things about the building already. And so it makes it shorter. You don't have to do as many submissions to the MSBA. But you do still have to do quite a bit of design because, every site is different, every school is different. So even if you do a model school, you have to customize it to your particular situation. So there will still be detailed design. You don't just get like a packet of drawings from the MSBA and then that's it. So it will save you some in Module 6. It won't save you much before Module 6.
So what they require that...
Dale, could we pause there?
Yes.
I think it's probably a good opportunity to pause and see if members of the committee have questions. We also have members of FinCom, the school building committee, select board in the audience. That you've just hit on a couple of important things there around the 2.2 million number, around this part of the process. I want to just hit pause and see if there are any questions at this point before we move on. Go ahead, Tom.
So this might be naive, but I don't think it is, because the early conversation we had at MSBA is that some of this 2.2 million might be able to be covered by MSBA too, right? So we have to appropriate it, but they may pay 40% of this 2.2 million, so we end up not spending 2.2 million. Is that accurate and correct?
It goes.
Yes. It's part of the cake. It's
part of the whole.
Most of it. So there's certain things MSBA doesn't pay for, is like hazardous soil containment. So if cost has to go to that, those sorts of things. But all of the basic things that we're talking about, yes, this is part of the total cost of the project that's eligible for reimbursement.
And is it reimbursed with this phase, or is it reimbursed at the end of the project?
Basically in the next phase of scope definition.
Could be a sum.
So there's a bit of a pay-as-you-go. It's not quite, years ago it used to be, just that reimbursement at the end, you don't have to outlay everything anymore.
Am I understanding correctly that it's not until Module 5 that we are reaching an official agreement with MSBA? Like, could they decide at Module 5 not to fund our project? Is that the decision point?
No, it will be, it's going to be decided through the eligibility period. And so then at that point, that is, a commitment to go forward with your project. The agreement in Module 4 that Imelda mentioned, project funding agreement, that is the dollar amount. It is a scope, so meaning how many classrooms, how many square feet, all of those kinds of things, and cost and total dollar amount that MSBA, it literally is a contract between the town and the MSBA. So at that point, you know exactly how much, they're paying, and it's not just a percentage, there's certain things that are eligible and not. So, but that would be for the, what they will pay for the construction later.
So when we go to town meeting to request 2.2 million, do we know if this project is officially happening? That's what I'm not understanding.
The answer is no, you won't know it when you go to town meeting and ask for 2.2 million, but you will know it before you spend anything.
Okay.
And so if you don't spend it, it's just not spent. So that translates to, MSBA has a lot of competition to do these projects. So they do not want to go through, a lot of steps and, commitments to communities that they're going to do a project, and yet there's not financial support for it, and then they have to go back and say, okay, no, we got to rethink this whole thing. So it's sort of one of many things that demonstrates the town is prepared to go forward with the project.
Tom.
And just to amplify that, so at that point, you go through those scope definitions, and the next, if you will, bailout period for the town would be to not fund the construction later in Module 5.
Tom, go ahead.
So just, I think a couple things that I learned in some of the earlier conversations that may help here. All those little, little people things on that screen are basically checkpoints that they can approve or not approve. But they've also said that the way in which we organize ourselves going up to town meeting and how quick and efficient we are impacts their approval or not approval for the next phase. So that's part of one of the reasons why Fidel and Tom and I and Sean and others have been working so aggressively to get ourselves well scheduled and well lined up, so that come November, everything that we need to have submitted will be done pretty much. It will be 3 months ahead of schedule, and that should look well in the MSBA Board of Directors meeting to say, hey, these guys got their stuff together and they're ready to go. And that's part of that feedback process there. But then as you look at those other things in 3 and 4, 4 is kind of the big point where you have that schematic design, and they say, okay, this is where I'm going to say it's going to be 47%, it's going to be 53%, it's going to be whatever percent, so that we know how much they're going to reimburse before we go to town meeting, not before we go to town meeting, before we go to town. Actually, town meeting first, because town meeting has to approve it before it goes to the final ballot, before we go to the ballot for the big money.
Okay, thank you.
Carla?
MSBA wants a commitment from us, right, initially, that, because they're setting aside money for us. So if we take them through this process and then at the end say, you know what, we're really not that interested, they could have gotten another school involved because there's only a limited amount of funding. So,
Chuck?
Again, I go back to, I really think as part of our sales process at town meeting, we need to tell them what they're going to get for 2.2 million. So we really need to have our arm, I know this is the first phase, but we really need to have our arms around what the next spend is going to be.
Well, I mean, let's be fair, though, you can only project. at
Right,
this
well,
point in time.
better than
Better than the
what we
number that's
have
there
now.
right now, right.
Okay.
Well, and I know, Chuck, that you're talking about a much longer explanation, but to sort of bring that home, what this $2.2 million funding is to getting your professional team, providing funding for all kinds of testing that really the focus is what might impact cost. There are byproducts of that too in terms of, impact to the neighborhood and so on, but what is the cost? So then you go through the feasibility study and the schematic design and come to what is as best as can be a definitive construction cost. And that's why, as Imelda said, you want to not underfund that, because if you need to look at soils, if you need to look at water, if you need to look at some other unique cost about it, you want to know when you do that schematic design, because if it's part of it and it's part of your funding agreement, it's part of the reimbursement. And if you shortchange that process and then later find out you need to do a significant amount of traffic or off-site work or anything else that drives the cost of the project up, then they're not participating in that cost. There are some exceptions, but essentially, they're trying to figure out how many projects they can fund. And that's why they're looking for, their word, which is a very robust schematic design. It's far more than what happens for most other types of projects in that schematic. Because that's sort of it in a nutshell, is to get, shake everything out and know what the cost is going to be. So this is a good time to address your question about the model schools. So what MSBA really asks you to do, it would not affect this current phase and funding. And when you go to the scope definition, what they really want you to do is, hire the architect and project manager, do the feasibility study. And when the feasibility study is complete, and you know what you need, enrollment, program space, site configuration, all those things, is then you ask MSBA to consider you for the model school program, and they will work with the town to determine if there is a model school that would be appropriate for your educational program and site. For instance, like an urban site, like a 3 or 4 story building, so obviously picking a model school that's a 1-story doesn't work. So that's what they really look, is to sort of just focus on your needs, get through the feasibility study, and then evaluate if there is a model school that's compatible. Now, there are, Melda, it's like 12 or 15 model schools, I think, so there's many choices. And at that time, if you choose a model school, your architect will be the architect of that original school. So when you advertise for, an OPM and a designer, in particular a designer, for this scope definition, to do the feasibility study, that needs to be acknowledged that you might consider a model school. So they might go through the feasibility study with you, and then you determine a model school that's by some other architect, at which point you would change architects.
Thank you.
Okay, so there's no other questions in the room if you want to continue.
So that really gets us through, this current phase. So that, in some ways, to keep your eye on the prize, if you will, to get through the eligibility period. Now, if you'd like, we can walk through what would happen after that. Is that helpful? Just to we can do it kind of quickly, but give you an overall view. I'm clicking on the wrong screen here. Mel, do you want to pick up with the?
Yeah, we can do a quick spin. I think probably most folks in the room
Yeah.
have seen this in one setting or another, but maybe a quick spin.
Sure.
Sure. So, like we've been saying, module 2 is about forming the project. So you advertise to get an OPM,
That's what I mean.
then you get an OPM, and then you advertise to get an architect, and then you get an architect. And then module 3 is doing the feasibility study. So there's a bunch of information that needs to be part of the feasibility study. There's the program aspect of it, and what are you going to do in terms of the educational program, your space study and all of that, and then also the preferred schematic report, which you get very preliminary drawings of the building, very, very preliminary cost estimate. You look at alternatives. So kind of like I said before, so one alternative that you'll be forced to look at is a renovation addition, and you got to go through the steps and show how much that would cost and how that would or would not, in your case, most likely would not meet your needs. And then you determine which option you want to proceed with, and then you go into module 4, which is the schematic design, and you come up with a schematic design report. And the whole purpose of this is to go further into it so that you can completely define the scope, the budget, and the schedule. And so you will have your OPM, you will have your designer. If you are going to do a design bid build, you'll know that at that time. If you're going to do a construction manager at risk, you'll know it at that time. And you're defining all of these so that you can set up for the project scope and budget agreement, or the project scope and budget, which firmly defines what it is that you're going to do and what the budget is and all of the calculations to figure out what MSBA's portion is versus the town's portion. That will all get defined at the end of this phase, or at the end of this module. And then from that, we develop the project funding agreement, which, you know, is the dollar value, percent value agreement between MSBA and the town. The town votes first, and then MSBA votes after that. And then this basically, once you do the project funding agreement, then you go into the third phase, which is doing design development, construction documents, and then into construction, and then all of the stuff that happens after construction, such as there's a 10-month commissioning report that needs to be done, and then MSBA is starting to do a post-occupancy evaluation, which happens a few years later. And that's pretty much the MSBA system.
Thank you. Any questions on that piece? Tom?
I guess I just want to build a little bit on Chuck's request here for a better number. Because I think Dale's answer sort of answered a different question than I think what Chuck was asking for. So I just want to make sure we're on the same page of that request, which is, you know, the current, you know, scheme A or whatever it is that's out there right now for Killam, that's the single school absent Birch Meadow adjustment, as like a 66 to 72 number, give or take in it. I think what Chuck's asking, and I think the problem you're having, Dale, is it might be too early to do this, but I'm thinking of my kind of software development days where you have like a level 1, level 2, level 3 based estimate of what cost is going to be. I feel like that schematic design section is level 3. We know exactly what we're going to get. We know what the classrooms are going to look like, what the configuration of the school is going to be, et cetera. But I think what Chuck's asking for is, what's that high level number that we should level set the town meeting on that we're looking at overall? Because it's probably not 66 or 72 anymore. It's maybe 80, 90, 100. In reality, I think even our most recent filing for 24 classrooms plus this many special education classrooms plus this is probably even well beyond Scheme A. So if we were to take that just as our pie in the sky, you know, design of what we want, or space analysis of what we want, what is that dollar number at a finger in the air? It's a swag, right? So really wild guess. What does that dollar number look like as kind of our level 1, level 0 type estimate of what this construction might look like at this point in time?
I mean, we can do that, obviously, but, you know, just to bring that home, right now, you don't really know if you're building a school for 650 or 750. If it has pre-K in it, it doesn't have pre-K in it. So there's, there is a huge range of scope. Now, what we can do is, make some assumptions, and, schools are being bid every day, and we see what kind of range, cost per square foot they're coming in, and, you can, although it's not quite as simple as it seems, you can translate that to square footage and come up to a number. But, and it's appropriate to, advise the community that you think this is, an 80 or 90 or whatever number it is, and I get it that that's what you're trying to do. But, it's really not till you get through this feasibility study, that you really know that. And that's why the process is set up that you don't try to fund the construction until after that,
Right.
So I understand, and it could be, well, look, if we're headed to an $80 million project, we want to proceed. If it's $100 million, we don't want to. It's going to be hard to determine. But, we can try to update that as best and give you a range. But I don't mean to sound defensive, but it really is sort of a guess because the scope's not known. And that's kind of why the process has that funding layer. And I don't want to minimize the significance, of $2.2 million, but what you ultimately decide to bid, and build doesn't impact the current appropriation dramatically.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, Tom, I hear the point. I think, I think it is important to acknowledge that we're not going to build scheme A or scheme B, right? We're going to build something that comes out of this design process. These schemes were created to sort of inform us about where this project could be headed and to help us develop the statement of interest and so forth. I look at the 2.2 million almost as option value, right? It's that it buys us access to that next phase so we can figure out, what the real project is and how much it's going to cost and be in a position to receive reimbursement for that if we should move forward. I hear the thinking around, can we revise these Scheme A, Scheme B estimates? If I'm putting myself in the shoes of a town meeting member, I think I might be more interested in what Dale was suggesting, which is, some illustrative, here's what we're seeing for, other schools that are maybe similar, somewhat similar in scope, just to give you, it's an order of magnitude estimate at this point. It's really about the best that we can do, with the caveats that who knows what's going to happen with inflation over the next couple of years, as we go to bid and that sort of thing. So
A cost per square foot is perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what builders do that's what companies do when they do budgets all the time for building buildings, or, it's no different than this. You just, an estimate,
Yeah.
cost per square foot is fine.
Yeah. Okay. Carla, did you?
I hear what you're saying, Chuck, and maybe it's a single, point in time where we're going to do that for town meeting. When we get into the feasibility study, like Dale said, it is when you start to more solidify what your costs are going to be, because we could be doing these checkpoints time after time. And I think people understand that construction costs have gone up, and that if we present it at town meeting is, this study was done 2 to 3 years ago. We know construction costs have gone up. If we're going to build a building and we're going to get a percentage from MSBA, the cost of the building is going to be the cost of the building at that point in time. Are we going to, as a town, deny it because it's over a certain threshold? I don't know. But I think people understand that costs have gone up. And knowing we're looking at data from 3 years ago, maybe it's a simple one-liner, like you said, cost per square foot was this at this time and it's now this. The cost isn't going to go down, we know that.
And we can try to, we can go back and have a look at that and give you some, ballpark thing. And I think everyone understands it's like, you don't know what you're building yet, so it's hard to know the total dollars, but yeah.
Yeah, that's why I called it level 1, level 2, level 3.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's very rough.
Yep.
Not as rough much more precise, right? I mean, so we're asking for the very rough, but just, and I wouldn't even say, it's like, Sean, to your point, it's not scheme A or scheme B or whatever. It's, what do we put our papers in for, right? It's 24 classrooms plus 12 special education classrooms plus whatever else was on that list, which is a pretty extensive list. What does that look like?
Right. Okay. Just looking at the crowd here. Any other comments or questions on this piece before? Okay. Dale and Imelda, anything else on your end?
No, well, we can stand by for questions, or?
I think we are.
Yes.
I think we are. Good.
Thank you, Dale.
Hold on, sorry. I do see one. Ed's getting in at the last second here. Our FinCom, our esteemed FinCom chair.
Hi, thanks. Ed Ross, FinCom Chair, Kensington Ave. So just a couple, I think to the point that, kind of Chuck and Tom were mentioning, I think that context does matter. The one thing that I would caution against is that it's just not to set faulty expectations, because once a number is out there and starts to be shared, then I think to Carla's point, and, again, what happens kind of down the road, then you just don't want to have put something down that you now are, kind of stuck to, and then you have to reset expectations. I think that'd be very tough as well. So I think that's just something to caution against as well.
It's out there already. I mean, right? This presentation's out there for 3 years. It's the same one, really. So. Well,
but the only thing that I would say is that I think that's part of some of this outreach is that while it's been out there, I think if you had a show of hands, I don't think a lot of people have a, kind of a firm grasp on it. So I think, as we start to get to these next stages, the messaging is kind of paramount. Obviously, you want to have a lot of transparency, but I think the other part of it is that it's a long process and a lot can change. And I think, again, a lot of the things that you mentioned before, Tom, is, you have to build everything, all of the reasons, physical plant and curriculum, but then it's also, here are the costs, and there's a ton yet to be determined. I think it's just there's a lot that I think collectively, there's a lot of, again, a lot of smart people to be able to do it, but that was just the one thing that I wanted to caution against, is once you start to pinpoint a number, people hold on to that number, and then when you come back and say it's something different, then you've probably created more problems than you tried to fix up front.
Thanks, Ed. Okay, I think we can let you off the hook now. Dale and Imelda, thank you for the time tonight. I'm sure it won't be the last time we call on you to support us in these discussions, but appreciate the time.
Okay, very good. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dale.
Dale.
Okay, so the next order of business was just around the warrant article. There's a draft warrant article in the packet. We won't spend a ton of time on it now. I just want to talk a little bit about the, let me see if I can figure out how to get our camera back. I just want to, oh, there we go. Talk a little bit about the process to how we got here. So the form of the warrant article and the motion are quite thoroughly prescribed by the MSBA, so we don't actually have a ton of flexibility in how it's constructed. The things that we had to identify or populate, I would say, are a description of the project, the amount that we're asking for, the funding source, description of the parcel itself. So we worked with the relevant parties, we collected those pieces, we shared it with town council and asked them to draft it on our behalf. We did share an early version with our representative at the MSBA, who provided feedback about the point Imelda was making, which is that you can't just say a replacement of the building, which was the first draft that we had. It was a replacement of the building. You do have to have that renovation and addition option as part of the consideration set. So we've since revised it to include that language as well. Frankly, we don't have a ton of wiggle room as a committee to adjust this. I wanted to just sort of share it with everyone. If you see any sort of major substantive errors, we can certainly address that. But for the most part tonight, I just wanted to share it with everyone so that folks know what it is that we are holding a hearing about next week and what it is that we're going to be, likely voting on the 15th to submit for the town meeting warrant in November. So that's all I wanted to make sure we sort of got clear this evening. Any questions or comments or feedback from anyone on that? Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so now we will move to the handbook updates. I'll hand it over to Dr. Milichewski and Principal Rubino and Principal Tracy in just a moment. Just a quick context here. We, in the near future, will need to approve updates to, at a minimum, the RMHS and the Parker handbooks. So we are going to ask them to sort of share with us some of the updates that they're tracking towards and planning to make. Yes, go ahead, Carla.
Excuse me. I'd like to adjourn the Pelham School Building Committee.
Do you want to take a vote?
Second? Greg? Aye. Greg? We're voting to adjourn.
Yes or no?
Aye.
Nancy? John? Karen? Carla? Aye. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. So we will hear from Principal Rubino and Principal Tracy about some of the changes they're tracking towards, and then we'll also hear about some broader thinking around how we approach these handbooks, which will have some implications not only for the near-term handbook approvals, but potentially some policy implications and other things that we'll want to address as well. So Tom, I don't know where we want to start, if you have anything you want to add before we jump in, or?
Yeah, I can share quickly too. So, all right, so I know Principal Reno is tough to come out of the bullpen after 2.5 hours waiting, so thank you for hanging with us, Principal Tracy, too. Just want to share, so as we dive into the handbook conversation here, just a couple of things that have popped up as we've dove into this work. One is we've realized that there's a lot of inconsistencies in some part of the handbooks that we think is important that we gain consistency across all of our schools. So while we're going to have updates from both Parker and from the high school tonight, please know that our plan is over the next month is for us to try to create a consistent district-wide handbook that has a lot of the policies that we think are important that we have consistent across our schools. To come back to present that district-wide handbook sometime in September, and then to be able to have that approved before end of September, which we know is within our policy. Also, we would then have a district-wide handbook that applies to everything related to across the schools, and each school would still have their unique handbook. To give you a little bit of understanding, some of the things that we think are need to have consistent across our schools are our bullying plan, extracurricular activities and eligibility, how to permanently withdraw, internet social media policy, use of electronics in school, motor vehicle idling, student search of student lockers, dress code provisions, ESSA and foster care, 51A's mandated reporting, tobacco provisions, visitors observation, residency, physical education, medication policy, and services to EL students. So those are some of the many things that we think we need to get a grasp on to have consistent across our schools. So as you listen to Parker's, please know that we're interested to hear sort of the intent of the adjustments that Parker has made that we think will drive some of the handbook revisions we're trying to make across the district, but also know that we're not looking for a final approval tonight because we're also seeking consistency and alignment to current district policy. So with that, I turn over to Principal Reno, and thank you for presenting too. I know you were not a part of this process, so I appreciate you stepping up to present tonight.
Yeah, so I just wanted to start by saying this is something that was done due to an equity audit that the previous principal conducted with the school council, and it took place over the course of a couple of years. You can flip to the next slide. Actually, you can go to slide 3 at this point. So they were looking at equity for all, and biases do exist in the school community and can exist through disciplinary processes and grading practices. So this equity audit that they looked at specifically analyzed the handbook to ensure that all students feel safe, supported, challenged, and heard. So you can go to the next slide. So these are some of the major changes from the previous handbook to the current handbook that we have. The use of inclusive language, they ensured that mandatory law policies were included. It highlights some approaches to restorative disciplinary practices, and there are some changes to the dress code. So next slide, please. Thank you. Along with proper due process and tiered levels of intervention, the Parker Middle School Handbook now highlights restorative justice to address discipline. The next slide has some language, so I'm just going to read that. This is language right from the handbook. Middle school is a time of learning, both from successes and mistakes. The Parker staff transfers this belief to situations that come to our attention regarding misbehavior. We utilize practices such as reflection, restorative justice, and collaborative problem solving to help students to reflect and learn from their mistakes. Consequences are meant to assist in this reflection and learning. We relay to students the importance of learning from mistakes, making amends, and starting anew as we move forward from mistakes.
The consequences may include office detention, lunch detention, in-school suspension, and out-of-school suspension. These would not stand alone from the work we do with students and our communications with caregivers about learning and growing. So again, this really just highlights the idea for more restorative practices and restorative practices through conversation, learning from mistakes, the growth mindset philosophy. Another big change is the updated dress code. So I have some examples of why they updated the dress code language. As we see here, it supports the importance of expression of our identity through the various forms of clothing. So the example here is from our dress code. Clothing should be school appropriate by covering undergarments and private parts of the body and should reflect our core values. As we know, dress codes cannot be discriminatory or censor student expression, and this provides some links to some Massachusetts state laws that validate this and support the sentiments that are expressed in the handbook. And the next slide, again, just gives some examples of what the dress code was before and what it is now. So before, it did not allow excessively short shirts, shorts, dresses, and crop tops, tube tops, swimwear, pajamas, hats, caps, hoods, bandanas, or other head coverings or sunglasses. And now the language is reflected as, we support the importance of expression of identity through various forms, including clothing. While hats and head coverings are allowed, a staff member may expect removal in certain circumstances, such as, but not limited to, during an assessment, if the student's face is obscured, or if the head covering is being used to obscure earbuds or other items. Another change that I wanted to highlight was a language change. So when it comes to grading, an A+ an A or an A- would mean mastery rather than excellence. And we also have some highlights to homework. Previously, if a student did not turn in their homework, they may have been asked to stay after school. It was a little bit more punitive. This is, again, more restorative, and it's recognized as part of the learning process. It is recognized as an exercise in preview and review and reinforcement. We are recognizing that students, families, caregivers have other commitments outside of school, and teachers are going to work to coordinate assignments and assessments. And the belief is that students who are spending more than 1.5 hours cumulatively on their homework should be addressing that with their teachers, and we ask them to reach out to their team leaders so that this can be addressed with the team and assess those needs of the student. And finally, there is a little bit of work that does remain. I plan to work with our Parker School Council this year and other stakeholders so that we can have a clear vision and mission statement that represents a sense of belonging for all and identifies the core values of a Parker Middle School scholar. And if you have any questions, I can do my best to answer them for you.
Erin, go ahead.
Not a question, just a comment. So I've been fortunate to be part of the Parker School Council that worked on all of this. I'm really proud of this work that was done. We had students involved as well, and I think it's a standard that I hope our other handbooks will follow. It was really, really enlightening to talk through things like the dress code and the discipline and realize the difference between how things were written versus how things were practiced, and to really think of it from the equity lens, particularly, I mean, the dress code. I could talk for a long time about dress codes, but anyway, I'm grateful for the work that's been done, and I'm glad it's now out there for others to see.
Aaron, on that example, the dress code, something we think is important is having consistency in the dress code sort of policies across all of our schools. So that's something that we'll be looking at. I know Parker, a couple people have already alluded to, has sort of maybe up to speed with some of the current, sort of regulations as well. So I think that we'll be looking at some of the work that Parker's did to try to see if we can expand that. So just again, thank you for setting the stage for some of that work ahead. And that is one of those pieces that I think needs to be consistent in our, across all schools.
Tom.
So I know you weren't there doing it, but I guess I'll thank Aaron for the work and others that were there, but I thank you for the presentation. There's a lot of important stuff that was done here, the dress code and the discipline in particular, I want to call out and appreciate. But I also have some questions or concerns about some of the other updates that were there that I'd love to get your feedback on as a member there. But then, as we think about some of this stuff going forward. The first one that I have a question or concern about is the removal of the word excellence in favor of mastery. That's a conceptual, that's a teaching concept as opposed to, and a standards-based method of grading as opposed to the standard A, B, C, D that we have in place. And if we're doing mastery, we should be thinking about other ways to incorporate that kind of stuff as opposed to just dropping mastery into the excellence category. So it seems to be misaligned in my mind based upon where that concept comes from. So I'm curious where that came from overall, and if that's a standard we're thinking about on a greater level, or if we need to be kind of stepping back and saying, are we doing standards-based grading, or are we doing A through F-based grading? Those are two distinct things that we've kind of intermingled with this update.
I can speak to that a little bit. Again, I think that this is one of those that should be consistent across middle schools as well. And I don't know the Parker context in the conversation. I think share a little bit about what Tom is speaking about too, is that the idea of standards-based grading, a lot of times we'll use language around, meeting expectation, approaching expectation, making progress towards expectation, language like this, right? But those are generally, right, if we talk about standards-based grading, aligned to numerical 1, 2s, 3s, like a different sort of grading scale, right? So I don't know, I think what you're questioning is whether or not a traditional grading scale of A through F can align to the language of mastery, or if that's sort of two systems that don't necessarily line up, right, when you're talking about grading prices. A lot of districts have moved full into standards-based grading. We have not. So inherently, there's an inconsistency already between would be happening here and other schools. So I don't have an answer for you right now. I'd like to dive in with our teaching and learning team to think about that more, talk to our other schools as well. But I do agree that there's a little bit of tension there that we have to figure out in that language too.
Just building on that a little bit more, if you look at the theory behind it, it's that you can get more kids. It's not a bell curve based model. You can get more kids to that 80, 90%, understanding, which fits with our equity statement, right? We want all kids to achieve. So in that regard, I'm on board with it, but it does seem misaligned, and we just want to make sure. The other thing I have, and this is kind of a visceral reaction from the past, is that historically, at some of our schools, we've said, if we don't get the entire class, at least 80% of the class, to mastery level, none of the class moves forward. And that's a problem. You remember those conversations, right? So that's a problem that aligns with this mastery concept as well. And I think we got to be very careful about that there's other supports for some of those students so they can achieve that, but the rest of the class continues to move forward and achieves the rest of the standards that are being expected of them. So there's inherent thoughts around that word mastery that I want to be very, very careful with. We don't just slap it into an overall, handbook, as the case may be.
Get at even more complexity too. Like, for example, there's some grade level standards that students aren't expected to achieve mastery until sort of the end of the school year too. So, right, so they're supposed to be progressing or moving towards a standard, and then that's okay that they haven't reached mastery yet too. So I think that there's a lot of complexity and nuance in there too, that again is where it's worthwhile for us unpacking. But I hope that when we come back with the district handbook, that we're able to say this is consistently what we're doing across the board. We've looked through all these options, but I can share a full shift to standards-based grading is not something that's on our horizon right now. That is something that I know would be a monumental shift and would take a lot of time in both efforts to change practice too. So we'll work on sort of aligning and making sure we're on the same page with what that would mean if we were to make a shift in language across the district.
One more.
Sure.
And that's the overabundant use of the word caregiver. Parents are accepted from most definitions of caregiver. The synonym of caregiver is guardian. So in essence, we've taken the word parent out of the handbook. In addition, we've replaced legal references that have the words parent and guardian with caregiver, which isn't the same thing. We need to be very careful about that over-encompassing use of caregiver in my mind. We're also, there's a perception from some, whether fair or unfair, that by doing that, you're taking away certain parent rights or parent obligations by taking that word out. Whether that's fair or unfair, you can look at me like that, but there are certainly perceptions in that regard as well. Whether caregiver is more inclusive, which I think is the intent, is not accurately backed up by the definition of caregiver. And that's what guardian was for, with parent and guardian. So I think there's something to look at here. And again, state law says parent and guardian, but yeah, we've taken state law references and replaced parent and guardian with caregiver, saying it's state law. That's not state law.
I would just share that. I think we did talk about that last meeting too, right? I think that we shared, I think the intent of this was to be more inclusive, right? And I think that actually many of our handbooks still just say parent, right? I think we have some movement to that. So I am with the intent of the group to move forward to something that's more, I think, inclusive. Now, I think what we landed on last time as a follow-up conversation is to say that we think that parent/caregiver is a very inclusive term too, and I think that creating that sort of language across the board, I spoke with Principal Rubin about that. She was supportive of that. I think that most people who have even pushed for caregiver have also shared, yeah, I'm supportive of parent/caregiver too. I hear the argument, if you have caregiver, does that also include parent? I'm not getting into that whole argument and debate right now. I think that if we move forward as a district to try to be as inclusive as possible, we feel that parent/caregiver is an inclusive term, and I think that that's what we're going to try to do in terms of consistency across sort of the board.
The parents/caregivers, parents and caregivers thing makes sense to me in most instances. Tom brings up a good point, though, that I don't know that I'd considered before, which is there might be references in there that are specifically talking about things that entail legal rights that an individual has as a parent or guardian, right, which is a formal, meaningful legal term of a child that somebody else we might consider a caregiver may not necessarily have that same legal right. So we probably do want to make sure that we're being thoughtful about the instances where we are going to say in our handbook that a caregiver has some authority or can make some decision on behalf of a student where they actually don't necessarily have the legal right to do so, unless they are a parent or a guardian, according to those formal definitions.
One example brought up to me today is a nanny is a caregiver.
Right.
But they don't have legal rights for a child.
Right.
So I think we're starting to get into some of the legal land of this too. We'll certainly get as we start to look at our policy, what may be circumstances where that terminology is more appropriate. So thank you for raising that.
Can I make one comment?
Please.
We want to be consistent as well, because when for the policy subcommittee, we were changing the reference to parent and guardian, right? So we're not even being consistent among all the documentation we have.
Yeah, that was some of the policy implications I was alluding to earlier, as well as even the process around which we approve handbooks, right? If we're moving to a district-based handbook, do we want to review that policy that says the district-based handbook is one that we'll approve, and it's, say, superintendent discretion whether the individual school pieces get approved. We'll have to think through that, right? So a lot of implications here. We'll figure out how to get to where we need to get statutorily by the end of the month, by the end of September. Principal Rubino, thank you for sort of stepping into the minefield on this one. This is
My pleasure.
yes. Dr. Corum.
Jeffrey Corum, Ridge Road. I had one particular question on the Parker thing, and then more a general comment for this overall district-wide thing. Could you back it up one slide for me? There was something just a little odd on the wording of this last bullet there that says, students who spend more should communicate that information to their child's team leader. So I don't know how that actually shows up in the Parker handbook, but it's not the students who have a child. But, so like I said, that's not what that's an overview of the handbook. So I don't know what that actually looked like through the pages and pages of the handbook. The other comment that I wanted to make was I have a particular memory of my daughter entering 6th grade and being given the handbook and an assignment that she had to read and understand the whole thing and sign to this effect. And as I went through the handbook today with dozens, if not hundreds of pages, and particularly as we add these MGL references, Mass General Law references, there's a lot of stuff that I'm not sure is appropriate for a 6th grader to sign that they have understood. So if we can somehow separate, here's the stuff that's really appropriate for a child, and here's some stuff that, maybe goes in an appendix that says, this is the law, and I understand why we want to have it in there, but that's not really what we intend the child to be understanding and understand that their behavior is constrained by these guidelines.
Correct. Yep.
Thank you.
It's really good feedback. And Thank you, Jeffrey. We made some notes on that last piece there too. And I think I just also, as we close out Parker, thank Rochelle, and but I also like to thank the rest of the Parker community. The process that I think Parker went through, having students, having staff, having families around the table, kind of working through these in a very thoughtful and methodical way to create what we think is a more inclusive product, I think is really impressive. So I'd just like to thank all those who were involved in that process for moving things forward.
Before we move on.
Sure.
Rochelle, just one minor thing for you, and it's real, this is kind of I'm channeling my Dr. Corum here. There's a section there that says use of 3G and 4G wireless connection is not allowed during the school day. We have 5G now. There's Edge, so you might want to just edit that a little bit and just.
Kids love to find those loopholes, right? I'm on LTE, it's fine. Yeah.
I had middle schoolers that absolutely would have found that loophole.
Very good. Okay, Mr. Tracy.
Just one quick question. How do I move along the presentation?
You say, Sean, next slide, please.
Sean, next slide. Perfect.
Solution for this evening.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you as well for your flexibility. I know sneaking me in a day or two before school starts is not ideal. Thank you also for your patience. I know it's not always easy to get peppered by different change memos as you're coming into a meeting. And I certainly acknowledge that was both due to timing, but also due to myself as a first-year principal. We made our way through last year. I'd like to thank my school council, my parent reps in particular, Eileen Manning, Marianne Tompkins, and Michelle Greenwalt, as well as my colleagues, Lori Donahue, Sharilla Lestrade, and Tim McIntyre, as well as our student representative, Connor Patterson. I can assure you we will be using a much different process moving forward, bringing to you any proposed handbook changes by May so that it could be voted on before the end of the school year. So with that being said, given the timing in the process, Sean, please, thank you. I'm going to use this presentation really just to guide me. And I look forward to being invited here again. I'm going to try to do the best I can given the timing, just stick right to the student handbook. However, I want to mention before, there's some pretty exciting work happening at the high school. It was great meeting the staff today, can't wait to meet the kids. But as you heard today, there's a lot of other initiatives going on, from dual enrollment to innovative pathways to the induction of our academic support center. These are all topics I would love to discuss, and I hope I will be invited back in the future to bring some information on those. And I'll bring some students with me as well. Given the timing in the process, our decision as school council was simply to go forward with the attendance policy as well as some recommended changes to the code of conduct language. The previous memo that you saw had different topics on it. Thank you to my school council. It was really their decision ultimately to press pause on moving forward any of those changes until we could have a full meeting, in addition to wanting to include our students. We did not feel we had enough student voice and agency with some of our changes. Listening to the dress code, I can hearken back to my days as a middle school principal and engaging the students on the dress code conversation. We want to do the same thing at the high school level. So it would be great to have open conversations around things such as dress code, such as how we're acknowledging academic success as well as social and civic success. But quite frankly, it's going to be a product of conversations happening in the fall. I will say to everybody's credit here about consistency. Consistency is key. When I looked at our handbook, I must say there's a lot of places there where we need revisions. And I think when you look district-wide and you take a step back, having consistent language across pre-K-12 ultimately is going to lead to more clarity for our parents and our students, and also help us with our enforceability of policies. The other changes that are put forth, we have some date changes, names changes, that kind of thing, as well as our attorney is going to work with us, continue with our district policies as well as our school policies. And I will say I'm very grateful that my school council gave up an hour and a half of their time last Thursday to review all the changes, and we are in unanimous agreement to move forward with these proposed changes. Sean? Awesome. Thank you. I I will say, without bringing a lot of data this evening, I would ask that you please ask for the data. It is one of these pieces with the attendance policy that I'm very proud of, is the clarity of language. I think that the way it was written previously in its narrative form was confusing. I think the way it's been streamlined is better and more accessible for kids and parents. In addition, the new language holds us accountable. And when you think about some of our current practices, which we have done last year, things such as reviewing data regularly, forming a committee that's going to look at our attendance data once a month. Certain practices that really bring about a systemic look at data, and as well bringing in more of a collaboration amongst our staff, looking at ways in which we can problem solve, and most importantly, ways in which we can partner more with families and be proactive. There are pieces to the attendance policy which I know that a subcommittee has looked at and may give some feedback. We will certainly take all of that into account. Part of the language as well reflects just a purpose of being more proactive. We have a real issue at Reading Memorial High School with our attendance. I think when you look at our chronic absenteeism rates, they're out of whack. And I think in part, that has to do with policy, but it also has to do with our ability to enforce and with some staffing. Our assistant principals are phenomenal. They're already, both Ms. Buckley and Ms. Terrio, working very closely with parents, having meetings, calling parents in, really trying to be proactive and working as a partnership, getting students to attend school. I think that should be in our policy. I think we should have things that hold ourselves accountable to make sure that we are doing that and doing that in a systemic way. The last piece, the code of conduct changes, very similar to what was presented from Parker. They reflect our current practices and our desire to be restorative and not simply punitive, and also be preventative. So as you look at some of the code of conduct changes, excuse me. We have an attendance policy proposed changes. I mentioned this before, but I'll just say very quickly, the major changes for our attendance language is the purpose to be clearer for our parents and students, as well as a streamlined system for credit recovery. That streamlined system for credit recovery we piloted last year. And I will say, much to all of our joy, we were able to get many students their credits that they needed for them not to be retained going into the subsequent year. The overview of the code of conduct proposed changes, when you look at the introduction, there was some inconsistency, and I'll be frank and say that the absence of our portrait of a graduate language was clear. For those of us who weren't involved with the portrait of a graduate, the creation of which, I'm very nervous that if we don't start utilizing some of its language in our policies, as well as we're describing some of our practices and events and celebrating our students, that we will lose that document, and that document will simply sit on a shelf. So I will thank Ms. Terrio for taking some of the language within our portrait of a graduate, blending it in with our restorative practices, and redoing our introduction. There is a second bullet there about identification badges. We made a conscious decision as a school council to make sure that we did not include the word lanyards. We'd like to go back to our student body and ask how the students feel that they should be made visible. And again, increasing some ownership and agency over that. There was a new page given for to explain the conduct. I'll also say some of the language that was added, probably the best example would be the language around civil rights violations. The language was there really to make the infractions more accessible to students to understand. In no way did they impact the infractions themselves or really the consequences, but instead just provided further elaboration to make it more accessible. We also divided out teacher detention and administrative detentions. It may seem like a minor thing, but those are, it's reflects our current practice now with a progressive form of discipline. And last but not least, the social probation. This is new language that we've included in. I will say that Reading Memorial High School does an excellent job with its restorative work and not going right to suspensions. I've worked in many different schools before where that was kind of the go-to. I will say that when you look at our data, we have very few students out of school suspension or even in school suspension. And to me, that's a credit of the work of the staff, as well as our assistant principals, as well as the agreement and partnership we have with our families. Social probation is a way to keep kids in school. In essence, it's would be part of a major infraction, and it would bar students for a short time from any social activities or extracurricular activities outside of the school day. I know how many of us feel. I feel strongly as a former coach that the benefits of extracurricular activities extend far beyond just the competitive nature of athletics or the joy in performing in our music or productions. But I will say this, that the most important thing is we have our students in school, in classes, every day and on time. And this is a way to keep that in place. It would not be something that we would take lightly. Again, it's for the only major infractions, but it is something that I support.
That was it.
Short and sweet.
Okay, questions? Or maybe feedback from policy subcommittee? I don't know where you folks want to go.
Can we share one thing too? I just wanted to bring Jen in here, who's Kevin spoke a little bit about just the attendance work, so I know that was kind of one of the major shifts in the handbook. So I'd like Jen just to share a little bit just of the context of that too, because I know that drove a lot of what's in the changes here.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I've been giving updates all last year on this committee and the work they're doing, which was really to start to create that alignment and consistency across the district. And I just wanted to acknowledge, we had staff from elementary, middle, and high school. We had teachers and administrators, special ed and general ed. It was led by Katie Buckley and Steve Burnham. The other members included Curtis Martin, Adam Blaustein, Alana Schoen, Jennifer Baskin, Kelly Bettenfield, Steph Lassise, Steph Waite, Mary Juliana, and Jay Pledge were all part of this and actively looked at pulling all of the systems that were in place in every school, figuring out where things came together and where they went apart. And as we discussed a little bit this morning, so much of what is policy, what is practice, what is procedure, all seem to somehow get mushed together and really pulling out what are each of those pieces. They really tried to create celebrations and support, as Kevin mentioned, that meaningful credit recovery, really shifting from you're not here, this is bad, and here's your makeup work, to we need you to learn this, let's figure out how to do this. There was a lot of contracts written that were piloted at the high school and some of the middle schools and one of the elementary schools that worked out very, very well. And so I think, as one of you had mentioned, that the difference between what's in writing and what's in practice, we really need to align that work. And so even to the point, I also wanted to recognize Liam, our new data specialist. He has been instrumental. I kind of went, here's Katie and Alana all summer long. They've been talking to him. He's been meeting with the clerks at the different levels to talk about what are the attendance screens that need to be filled out. How can we pull the period high school attendance by period to see when students are there or aren't there. And so it's been a very, very collaborative effort. I'm super proud of this team. And it's going to be ongoing work for the rest of this year as we start to figure out what of those systems are working, what still needs to get more aligned. But we really are looking at that district alignment across the board. So families are getting letters at the 5th day, the 10th day. They're getting phone calls in between. There are attendance meetings at each building. And as Principal Tracy said, we're really looking at the data meaningfully meaningfully at the district level and at the school-based level. So those are all different parts of the work that happened with this committee.
I really appreciate that, and I will say the work of the committee has been terrific thus far. The consistency piece and putting it in action, that's the next step. Part of what Dr. Stiles was referring to, consistency in the language of letters that go home, making sure that after this number of absences, it triggers this action. And I think that really needs to be in the language so that, again, this is consistent with not only MGL, it's also consistent with other schools and districts. I do feel that, I mentioned before, our statistics show that we have to address this issue. This is not something where, and I will be glib, we had to address this as my former district as well. Our statistics and our data in the dual county league are probably much better than Reading Memorial High School at the moment, but there's no magic wand or silver bullet for this. I think truly looking at data meaningfully, coming up with a systemic approach, looking at proactively partnering with families and getting people into the building for meetings, that will yield good results. I truly believe now that Katie and Jess have started to implement some of this language, especially the credit recovery piece, and bringing parents in and families in, you're going to see an improvement in the data.
And I just want to add one other piece that's been instrumental because the town is so generous and collaborative. Erica McNamara and her group have also partnered with us, and they're also helping with home visits, especially for families who have excessive absences. To be able to have a pair of social workers go in and really support and help has been critical in some of that work, and they've been great working with Katie and Jess and the middle school principals as well, so.
Erin.
Somewhat random, but something that jumped out at me. So students are not given credit if they're dismissed before 12 p.m., but we as a district have 11 a.m. release days that we count as full school days. I think we do 2 a year. So I was surprised to see 12 p.m. as the cutoff. Does anyone know?
I couldn't give an explanation. It's based upon our full school day. You can have an abbreviated school day, and from that, it's prorated on what would be acceptable for attendance. Really, that what comes into play is often extracurricular activities or events in the evening. And if a child isn't in school present before noontime without an excuse, then they can't participate in the afternoon activities. The same would be if it was an 11 o'clock dismissal. I'm not going to be able to do the math at this point in the night, but it would be prorated off of that. So it's a certain percentage of the school day.
Okay.
Are you saying it just seems silly that some of the days that the kids get out, maybe at 11:30, everyone gets credit for that day, but then on a day when someone gets dismissed, it just doesn't seem.
It seems inconsistent to say, like, we're not counting you, you got dismissed at 11, we're not counting that school day for you, but hey, the day before Thanksgiving we are, and the last day of school we are, so.
Principal Tracy and I
It just
can
sort of
look
jumped
into
out
that.
at me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Erin.
Yeah, we can look into the exact mathematical calculations with the attendance committee and get back to you.
I mean, okay, so just from a,
Go ahead, no, go ahead.
From a policy committee, we mentioned it earlier, just a couple of things, Kevin, that you heard already, but just so everybody's on the same page again. In particular, we talked a lot about the notification and notes required in certain cases, and this is a case where Parker's handbook is out of alignment with the RMHS handbook, and I think we as a committee generally agreed was more appropriate, in particular when it comes to doctor's notes. Many people know that doctors wouldn't even let you in their offices, so to get a note from a doctor saying your child is sick, to use that as an excuse and as an excused absence wasn't tenable in the COVID era, and most people don't even send their kids to the doctor when they have a fever and they can, address it at home, because doctors don't give you anything anyway, except to tell you, okay, Take 2 of these and call me in the morning.
And a bill.
And a bill, exactly. So that was one thing, and that's kind of consistent throughout that whole section. Similar with colleges. When you take college visits, they never give you a note. Nobody's going to tell you, hey, I showed up at this college visit. You just have to kind of trust the parents in that regard. So think about that notification and where do we trust the parents to say this is what's happening, as opposed to where we need a note to actually say something's happening. Parker's case is it says if they're out for more than 5 days, that seems like a reasonable balance to achieve in those cases. So that was one thing. The other items we talked through was really more along the lines of the truancy-related concern. And, Dr. Stice brought to me that Katie had mentioned that there was some concern about the policy saying that with truancy, you could not have any credit makeup, basically. There's one policy that we have currently that has that, and it's specifically the skip days policy. It does not define skip days, technically, but I think we all know what we're talking about. And in fact, we worked Unity Day around skip days last year.
May have, yes.
So, there's some conversation that within the policy subcommittee, we're going to look at skip days and probably repeal it. That language isn't consistent with what we'd want anyway. We want a student to be able to get back and get their work done, obviously with whatever penalty has to be necessary beforehand, but that's kind of covered in the next section of the handbook anyway.
No, I appreciate that, Tom. I think in 2 points there, certainly there's the policy, we want to make sure it reflects our practice. And I think when we look at accepting parents, phone calls, we recognize that most doctors will say, oh, you have a fever? Don't come in until it's 3 days. So we need to be reasonable when we apply that degree of accepting those excuses. The other piece, the truancy, I'm a firm believer. I don't believe in flat zero policies. And this is something for a later date. But, I just don't believe that if a child makes a mistake, if it's plagiarism or cheating, I think they should be held accountable, but I don't believe in the flat zero. In the same way, I truly don't believe that a child who is truant is most likely truant for a reason. And I think we need to address the root causes there without penalizing that child and not being able to learn. So to me, I philosophically agree 100%. I think we just need to look at the language there.
Yeah. I think that even in this section, there's some sections to clean up in that regard, but I would ask you to look across the handbook as it is, because there are other sections that refer to notes that are necessary. Like, I think it's the senior test section that says you're exempted if this is the case, and it particularly refers to notes for being sick and stuff like that, which wouldn't be aligned with this section. So as you look at it and cross align all the different updates, keep all of this attendance stuff and just say, refer back to what an excused absence is, and only those cases fit, or something like that, so you don't have to have the language 15 times.
When you looked at our handbook, you can see that there's a lot of language in there. And some of it, unfortunately, you look at our code of conduct, some of the explanations afterwards of the code of conduct are in conflict with the code of conduct. So I think we just, we want to look a little bit, very closely at all of our sections, but I do appreciate that, Tom.
So now I'm taking off my policy hat. Sean, if I can continue?
Sure.
Because you hit the other thing, which is the code of conduct's not in alignment with the code of conduct.
Yep.
There are, especially when it comes to the chemical health section, right? That's an extension to that. It specifically disagrees with step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 above, and what the penalties are there. So the more we can align that, and that's been my bugaboo for the last 3 years, is getting that to be aligned appropriately, and in alignment with GICH and other things along those lines as well. That would be
our chemical health policy in general needs to be redone. Erica McNamara, the coalition, we need to do so in tandem. I found that my hands were tied at some points with the chemical health policy, in that it led directly to an automatic 10-day suspension. And what was not in place was the supports needed. And so working with Erica and redoing that chemical health policy is probably my #1 on the code of conduct. That, and we also have to have consistent language around bullying.
Around what?
Bullying.
Bullying.
Yep.
The thing about doctor's notes struck me as well, and beyond sort of the practicality of can you get to a doctor when you've got a run-of-the-mill, virus with a fever, right? It also strikes me as potentially an equity issue, right? It's a lot easier for, a family with one working parent and one parent staying at home than it is for a single-parent family, for instance. So as you continue to sort of think through these and explore these, I'd take that under consideration as well, that there are potentially equity implications of some of the requirements that we're imposing on families here.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Tom.
Just it's hard to tell how much of this, because of the redlining, Kevin, is actually the real version versus the not real version. So take this with a grain of salt. There's a lot of duplication in here as it is right now, right? So that might be accidental because of the red line, or it might actually be real duplication.
Okay.
So there's, even in the attendance and other sections, and I can take my notes here and just send it off to you and Jen.
That would be great.
So you have it as kind of a note there. But there are certainly items there that can be cleaned up, inclusive in the new attendance policy, that says this is saying the same sentence back to back, as an
Great.
example.
Thank you.
So that minor cleanup would be helpful and beneficial. And of course, other things that you have notes to do already in the attendance policy, like add the emails or other things like that, need to be added in here. And I would question if this is going to be part of the district one. So it's okay to have all the schools in here. But if this is just in the RMHS, we probably should take all the rest of the other schools out.
Yeah, and we did in our final copy, and I do apologize. I know the school council did recommend that we remove all other references to any other school's start time or their contact information.
And I just want to end and say, thank you for taking all the time you did to put this together, all the time that was done with the attendance committee, all the time that was put together with, the discipline policy, but then also all the time to get with the school committee and the school council on what they could absorb in the period of time that they had to work through that and say, yes, this makes sense.
I appreciate that, Tom.
We've had challenges with that in the past, and it's great to hear that we're able to bring that back together, and whether at Parker or other places, the more we can involve our parents, we always talk about levers for improvement in schools, right? Principals are definitely one of them. 2 of them are sitting here. Parents are another one of them. And the more we can bring them into the table, into the room and be part of that process proactively as opposed to reactively, the better off we'll be. So thank you for that, and I just want to continue to encourage you in that space.
Thank you.
Okay, so anything else on this topic for tonight? I'm sensing that 7:30 convocation start kicking in for many of us here, so we can move on to our last agenda item. And thank you, Mr. Tracy, appreciate it. And we will hand over to Ms. Baton for an overview of our new website.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm fading a little bit, so I'll try to perk it up a little bit. So you might remember towards the beginning of this calendar year, Dr. Milichewski invited the community to participate in a website design planning committee with the school department. We wanted, or we sought parents, staff members, community members to join us in improving our website so that we could improve our engagement and communication with everyone who's a part of our Reading Public Schools. So this evening I wanted to share with you 3 things. One is I wanted to share our gratitude for the 11 members who made up that committee. The second is to outline briefly what the committee accomplished. And then third, to share with you where we are today and give you a little sneak preview. There were 11 members who made up our design committee, and I can't share enough of my appreciation. They all brought with them different perspectives and just knowledge about website development and about the school department and about the community. They included Alicia Williams, Lauren Bennett, David Mastronardi, and I hope, David, I've pronounced his last name correctly, Jacqueline Lee, Kathy Shedlack, Amy Greco, Kathy Santilli, Meg Powers, Matt Darling, Chuck Stroh, and Julian Carr. It was a phenomenal team. this team worked together through approximately April to identify and prioritize what we wanted from a website. We talked about function, we talked about form, and we talked about content. I wanted to share with you just some highlights of each one of those categories and where we went from there. In terms of functionality, the team felt that the website had to prioritize functionality. It needed to ensure smooth navigation for all users. It needed to have a simple interface. We needed to ensure a secure platform. It needed to be ADA accessible and have options for multilingual families. In terms of the form, it needed to be consistent across schools, easy to use, reasonable loading time, one, again, that a user can easily navigate, simple, uncluttered, have a notification bar, and that the most important information for families would be front and center. And then in terms of content, they provided a whole list of things that they'd like to see on the website. And I started out by asking that the website be reviewed continually by checking the number of clicks that families and users, that we've defined families and, or that we've observed families and users. I'm sorry, I'm being inarticulate, but the number of sections on the website that users click on in order to find out information. So we wanted content that would be easily assessed and analyzed. They asked for school committee budget and meeting agendas, staff directory, program fees, student registration, newsletters, COVID stats, lunch menus, PTO and other support organizations in the community. And they wanted to see portrait of a graduate, the equity statement, the mission and vision, the strategic plan. So it was amazing that they came up with all of these aspects of the website. Where the committee landed was after we had this pathway and this set of guidelines and priorities, the staff members who made up the committee then shifted toward finding a website vendor who could perhaps provide services that met these needs in terms of function, form, and content. The committee interviewed, a smaller group of the committee interviewed 7 different providers. They narrowed it down to 2. After spending time working in the background of the website, playing in the sandbox, looking at other school districts, and then reviewing budget information, cost information, the committee unanimously chose School Blocks, which is a website hosting group that in fact just recently transitioned Linfield Public Schools website from Rediker to School Blocks. School Blocks cost about $350 more than our existing program, and the functionality we all have found is just so much easier to use, a vast improvement. I wanted to share with you just a quick little snapshot of what the website looks like. We will be going live soon. There were some unanticipated issues that came up that we're working out. And, but for now, for this evening, I wanted to show you what, a peek of what the website looks like. And I will share that as the school year gets started, we will be embedding this website with really beautiful pictures of our students and our teachers and the things that are going on in our school building. And Tom Zaya started us off by taking a picture recently of the new Turf 1 field. So, so I'm going to ask Andy to come in and share with me how to share my screen with all of you. Thanks, Andy.
It's okay.
Trying to give Andy all different scenarios tonight.
Give Andy a round of applause this evening.
All of the use cases tonight.
Exactly.
It's HJYQRS.
Learning my lessons.
So I'm going to just take you through just a very brief introduction, and then right before we go live, I'll share with you all the URL, and you'll be able to dig in and look at it more carefully, and we'll communicate the shift with our families. But there's so many cool aspects of this new site.
I'll just add while they're at it, Susan talked a little bit about accessibility. One of the things that we've had a hard time with the Rediker platform is just only a few people had the skill and the technological skill to be able to update content on the site, which is a barrier for us in getting information out and making updates. Like I would have to ask someone else to, who knows how to do this, that sort of thing. One of the things we like about School Block is that in short time, a lot of us is sort of figure out how to get content up there, and we think that will help school-based sites to get information up more consistently and ongoing, so.
Andy, if you want to try now, I turned off the screen sharing thing.
Oh, you did?
Well, because we said after we were done having the guests present, so I turned it off. I just turned it back on, so you should be able to share now.
And to that end, Tom, I wanted to, okay. I wanted to share that the committee, when they worked on.
Can you share again?
Sure. Oh. That they felt that it was extremely important that we have an owner of each site. And so the tech integration specialists have helped us roll this out and get it ready. And then they'll be meeting with our school secretaries in September, sharing with them how to use the site. And
Sounds like Siri.
Oh, that's promising.
Yes, Siri.
There we go.
Whoa. So thank you.
No student pictures yet, though.
No student pictures yet. So I want you to know that this is bare bones. But this part is really cool. Many of our families in Reading speak Portuguese, and just by making a quick link change, the entire site turns, we're going to be changing that video, but it turns to whatever language in there. I think more than 45 languages available. So any family in our community that speaks Portuguese may come in and click on the site and be able to read this. I'm going to pop it back into English because and I wanted to walk through with you just this ribbon up here. We have an About Us school committee and sections for our staff, parents and students, all of our departments. Let me show you Tom Zaya's photo of this beautiful Turf 1R. Calendars, all of our schools are here, our staff, and contact information. And if you scroll down, let me go back to the website, the district website. There's going to be information on upcoming events. There'll be Dr. Biliteracy's weekly updates and COVID dashboard, My School Bucks, quick links. Down here, we have Twitter, Facebook, privacy policy, and we'll also be adding Instagram. Let's go back to Reading Memorial High School.
Will we have direct or live feeds of any Twitter or Instagram stuff
Yes.
integrated as well?
Yep, in the lower right-hand corner we will. It'll be constantly rolling. And in fact, I thought I saw that on the high school. I'm scrolling right now. Chuck had it on the website. Here it is. Here's Twitter on the Reading Memorial High School. There's a school feed. This will be for some important key information at every school building. It's also by department. For the high school and for every other school, we have academics, school information for parents, for students, for staff.
Susan, do you mind sharing just like an anticipated timeline of when this will go?
Yes, we have a meeting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., 11 o'clock our time, 9 a.m. Central Time, to review the two issues that we uncovered, and hopefully we'll resolve those quickly. Then we'll make the information available to school committee and then share with our families.
Great.
Tom?
So I raised this morning in the office. The current website is the only website that has all of our packets for the last 7 years on it. It is the only, and those are OML required packets, so we cannot lose them.
Yeah.
So hopefully, I think you're already working through that. I know that was already raised as a question, so hopefully that's happening.
And I wanted to show you that we were able to go as far back as FY16. So right now on the new website, we have packets from FY16 through FY22. If you'd like, we can consolidate those and only show the last 3 years, and the rest we can put in an archive folder. I'm not sure how you'd like to.
The other option, potentially, is to send them off to Laura Gem.
Is
To send them off to Laura Gem and put them on the official town archives.
That's where they should. Yeah,
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
But either way, yeah, I mean, it looks like we only have through 16, so you've got exactly what we have on the website now, so
Yep.
as long as we're not losing anything, that's a good.
No.
Are you saying all of those are not on the town website?
They're not.
Which-
Packets have
which
never,
they
until
should be.
recently, our packets have never been submitted to the town, only our agendas had
I
been.
think it was when the town moved to their new website that they started including the packets as well, yeah. So as of now, we're compliant with OML because we've got through July 14th on both the current and the new version of the website, and then the last meeting and this meeting are already posted to the town site. So we're compliant in that regard, but, yeah, obviously we'll want to use this as our, not, I shouldn't say obviously, we'll want to consider whether we use this as our source of record or the town site as our source of record going forward. You know, my gut tells me people are going to come to our site when they're looking for this content versus it more often than the town site, so it makes sense for us to have it here. If the town wants to duplicate it there, I'm not sure I see any harm in that. But I do think it makes sense to have them included on our site as well.
If so, we should get the last couple ones posted to our site for FY23 as well.
We will, yeah. Did you want to extend any earlier than FY16?
I don't know that we have it. I mean, it's a good question
Oh,
if we have it,
okay.
so that's
Yeah,
a can of worms for another day.
I don't know if we have it either. Okay, we'll find it. So, it's late, and I just wanted to kind of give you a taste of what's to come. And again, I would like to appreciate, again, all of the community members that were a part of this. It was a great effort. We have an amazing group of committed families, our tech integrators, and Amy Greco, the secretary at Joshua Eaton, were phenomenal. Everyone has really worked hard on this, and I do hope that it is, you know, I expect that it will draw more families to the site looking for information and engaging in dialogue with us.
I have a couple of other technical questions.
Sure.
When the town website went live, it was essentially dead for about a 6 or 12-hour period. Should we expect the same for ours?
No, it will take a 20-minute changeover, and we're on Rediker until the changeover happens. So there's going to be no dead time. It's going to go
We'll
straight.
just flip over?
Yeah, it'll flip over.
And what about parent logins and passwords and
Yep.
plus portals and all that stuff, and
All
how's
of-
that going to work?
All of that is, Jimmy's ready to go. All of that is going to be working efficiently. One of the things that we're working on now is to ensure that the URLs redirect and forward families who are typing in Reading Public Schools, and that it goes directly to our website. So we're double checking to make sure that.
So, just, sorry, I know everybody's tired, but is plus portals Rediker, or is it separate and distinct?
It's separate and distinct, And this website, it's a website hosting, will draw you directly to Plus portals.
Okay.
Yep, there's no issue with that. It directs you there.
Great. Well, it certainly looks much more modern and refreshed, and I'm excited to see it in action, so. Any closing thoughts before I ask for a final motion?
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you to the group who helped too.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. All
I'll
right,
pass on your kind of words to the group.
is there a motion appropriate for 10:39 at night?
Second.
Aaron, seconded by Tom, all in favor? All opposed? We are adjourned.